My name is Vance Smith, along with John Corbett and James Beverly. We're glad to be with you. I will say Representative Tom McCall could not make it at the end, and Representative Jason Ridley is actually giving a presentation to the Meadows family for John Meadows, who y'all know unfortunately passed away. So he was a little worried if he came here and tried to make it back to Calhoun, he might not make it back, and we completely understand that. So, but glad that John's here. Like I say, James will be rolling in just a minute. Appreciate all y'all coming. Some of you may be new. This is the second meeting of 4, so some of you may be new. I just want to let you know we're pretty laid back. It's kind of easy going. Those that were at the first meeting heard some great information about Georgia, about economic development, and how we attract industry. We had, just to recap, we had the Department of Economic Development had a spokesperson, Georgia Power had a spokesperson, Department of Community Affairs had somebody come and speak to us, Council for Quality Growth came and spoke to us, and I know there were probably a few more in those, and some of them paired up together, but I thought it was good info. I think some of the information, and some of y'all may, I made this statement last time, some of you may have, with your local governing body, have gone over to the Department of Economic Development at 75 5th Street, and you may have gone in and actually gone in a room that they use, that Georgia Power uses, to present facts and figures about your county. And hey guys, come on in now. Come on in and have a seat. And how y'all do? You can jump anywhere you want to go. There's a couple of agendas right here. And but anyway, they presented facts and figures, and it made me realize that you can go over to economic development and meet with Georgia Power. I went with Harris County maybe 4 weeks ago. I'm a native of Harris County. We sat down, it was like a 4-hour session, similar to this, I guess, in time, but they gave facts and figures specifically about Harris County. And I've lived there all my life. I was born there. My dad was born there in 1918. Boom. I mean, it was instant. It was real interesting. So interacting with your local officials and using that tool, I think is huge. And some of the information I had seen that day with the county commissioners, and then when we met 10 days ago, they put some of that same information on the screen of what attracts businesses here and what the needs are, skilled labor and all the way down the line. I think that was a good program. So, you know, I encourage you to try to do that, and it's absolutely great. But each group had some great information. They all have their own angle. Maybe sometimes it's nice to get in a room and let one group hear from the other group. I think that kind of helps us all out and share that information. Georgia didn't become the #1 state to do business for 6 years in a row without working together. So I think that's been good. So, and it starts at the ground level and it works us all the way up. You know, I always say that top of the pyramid is the gov, and he's the guy in charge, but you got to have the ground troops to get the job done, and that's where we all come into play, citizens included. So I think it's good. Like I say, glad to have you here. We don't have, at the end of the last meeting, this meeting, and the next one, we don't actually have the last 5-10 minutes that we say is public comment. The way I kind of look at it, and hopefully John and James, we have each group present. We try to spend a few minutes at the end of each presentation to let the group ask some questions. And you know, if you've got a question or a comment or a statement, hey, jump in there and do that. If that presentation flips on a switch for you, let us know what you're thinking. And maybe questions we can't answer. And so just ask them, and maybe somebody in the room can. And hey, Jeff, glad we had you, man. But we're glad that y'all are here. And like I say, we're gonna kick it off this morning. We're gonna start with let Todd's gonna be Mr. ACCG as he is, and then he's got people that are coming. And I know John came in, and that's good. We're gonna let everybody have a little time, and yet at the same time, we're gonna try to keep it on schedule because we can adjust everything between now and 2, but at 2 o'clock, we're gonna close it down, and then we'll have another meeting in November and a final meeting in December. So let us know what you think, and we're all here to advance Georgia, so let's see if we can learn something and do that.
Where would you like for us to present from? The podium or right up here?
You know what? There again, you can stand like I'm standing. You can use the end of this table. We got to thinking maybe this wasn't too good because I could look in that mirror and watch it, but it'll all be backwards. But that podium is great if you want to use that. You just, however you want, whatever's easy. And if you want to use these chairs up here, make use of them. And so just make yourself at home. We'll let y'all just sit.
Is there a clicker for the PowerPoint that you're aware of?
Is there a clicker up here?
And we're also going to need to, was there one in the drawer?
No,
Give us just a second. Yes, I'll check.
I can call.
You want us at the podium or on the front?
Let me call. I can call Kelly.
That might be it.
Gonna try it. I'll call her right now. Thank you.
If I stand up there, I'm pretty sure that I can.
That is your, Commissioner, that is your PowerPoint.
Okay.
Hey, Kelly, this is Lance.
You got to take a copy of.
Yes, I
thank you very much.
I don't know that I've got one for everybody, but I think.
I don't know what you're showing.
That'd be great.
I can sit up there in advance.
She's gonna send IT over here.
Okay, we have it all but the clicker. All
right,
we may have a clicker. All right, I'll report you got. What you set up. And then I can just use, yes. That's it. Got it? All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, those of you that have come and joined the committee today. I'm Todd Edwards. I'm the Deputy Legislative Director of the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia. We follow this issue very closely along with the Municipal Association through the last legislative session and also through the study committee's work. Affordable housing is very important to Georgia counties. We have a lot of counties that have taken different approaches to this. Not one size fits all in this area, so different ones are doing different things. Also, what has been brought up earlier in these conversations was that of the subject of design standards, also very important to Georgia counties. But who we have speaking on behalf of ACCG today is DeKalb County Commissioner Jeff Rader. Jeff's got a lot of experience with Metro County issues, but his real profession in life is a professional planner. And he actually has helped a lot of counties and cities throughout the state work on affordable housing issues. So without further ado, Commissioner Rader, it's all you.
Thank you, Todd, and thanks to the committee and others for being here to talk about housing affordability. As Todd mentioned, I have worked in this particular area of practice for years. In the early 2000s, I worked with a mixed income communities initiative that tried to underscore the importance of workforce housing in communities throughout a metropolitan region so that people that work in particularly the public sector, the nurses, the public safety officers and others that serve the community could live in those communities. And we looked at many factors that would contribute to that. And interestingly, some of these very issues did come up in the development of those recommendations and strategies. And you know, what really became clear was that it is a matter of using the right tools for the right purpose and to try to strike the right balance, and that it really depends upon the place. So local governments do understand the dynamics of housing affordability. We know that workforce, as you heard from Georgia Power and others, is critical to economic growth. You know, it used to be that employers had to bring their own, and these are, you know, mill houses from the mill villages that are still in place throughout the state. I only present those to say that there is an extremely robust area of planning history that has to do with the planning and the development of these very small communities. The sponsors and the employers that built them wanted them to be cost effective, but they also knew that they had to think about design when they put them together so that they would be good places for their employees to live. And in many cases, these areas have withstood the test of time and have actually seen continued investment over many, many years, largely due to the quality of their design and the organization of the communities that they were in. Housing policy now, however, is primarily a local government responsibility. It's implemented through many home rule and localized tools, but there's some federal level tools. There are almost no state level tools in terms of financial tools and that type of thing for housing affordability. They're passed through from federal agencies or federal tax policies. But one of the things that we have learned is that to have sustained growth requires a balance of housing efficiency, and adherence to community standards. How are you? The clicker,
It's down here.
I think it's
Right
right
there
there
on
on
the
that
table.
paper there, but we didn't get it going. I mean, I'm good now since I'm set up at this location, but the next presenter may
Well,
want to make
it's
sure.
on the bottom here.
Oh, okay. So you have to plug that in there.
Yeah.
Good, I got
Plug
you.
that in.
All right, so we'll put it right
Give it a
there.
second,
See.
so we're good.
Okay, good.
Magic.
So, and as I mentioned, let's see. Home rule really does give us the feel for these issues to be able to maintain that critical balance. We know a monoculture of a single housing type limits growth. And it's interesting, it doesn't matter whether that monoculture is at the very high income end or at the low income end. Fayette County is one of the, is the most demographically prosperous counties in the state, but right now they're really facing a huge skewing of their population to the older generations, which is leaving school enrollment struggling. And then on the other end, if you end up being the place where all of the affordable housing in a region is concentrated, there is a danger of concentrated poverty, which taxes public service delivery. So it really is essential to maintain the balance, and local government is accountable for integrating these competing goals, and as I said, it takes many tools. Now, the framework that we work from is the state-mandated comprehensive planning framework, and each of our counties and cities participates in a comprehensive planning process. Plans are implemented through local policies, ordinance, and capital investments. We would actually like to see more state resources on the table in the form of coordinated state investment consistent with our comprehensive plans, compatible design and service delivery standards, to be able to, again, feed into our local and regional comprehensive plans and incentives to jurisdictions that actually succeed in planning their objectives. Currently, most state agencies work independently of this local framework, and we often have to bring our local plans to their attention in order to get priority for some of the programs that we would like to see accomplished. But mostly we're working with our own tools, and if we restrict our home rule-based tools, we're going to be even have another hand tied behind our backs. As I mentioned, there are great opportunities. Federal housing funding is designed so that they can be supplemented by state investment and make them much more effective. Infrastructure gaps, particularly in areas where we're trying to lower the cost of housing, to extend public utilities and facilities, can bring down the cost of workforce housing and make those developments more economically feasible. Certainly investment in critical operating systems such as healthcare and education, both the capital and operating side, can reverse depletion of under-resourced populations in the state and reverse, the depopulation of areas that need workforce in order to be able to thrive and attract new business. I want to challenge the notion that design standards are inherently a burden on housing affordability. In particular, good design facilitates higher density through lower land infrastructure and operating costs. By designing structures that are compatible with each other, that are durable, and that meet both the needs of the people that live inside and also outside of those homes, we're able to bring houses closer together. The biggest limitation on housing affordability is often the land that's involved, and to the degree that people want to protect themselves from incompatible design, often we see constituencies pushing for more land to be dedicated to each unit rather than less land, and that often ends up creating a cost constraint that similarly limits the availability of affordability. Well-designed homes allow homeowners to build wealth through appreciation. There is nothing worse than somebody moving into a poorly designed and building that may deteriorate over time, expecting to build wealth in that situation and then see the rug jerked out from underneath themselves. We speak from experience in DeKalb because when we were less concerned about the design of communities, we permitted a great deal in terms of starter homes in the county in order to provide that workforce housing. But what we found very quickly was that the cost of maintaining and operating those homes put homeowners at risk to the point at which when a downturn occurred, many of those houses ended up in foreclosure. They thought that they had, they underestimated the cost to maintain and operate their homes, and they found that they lost their homes, and thus I can show you many neighborhoods in DeKalb County that are still struggling by virtue of the poor design of those neighborhoods, the land intensity of them, and the quality of the buildings themselves that continue to keep those housing values underwater. Moreover, communities embrace attractive development. It doesn't really matter as much about the price point if it's something that people can see is high quality and is durable and that well serves those populations. We find that communities are much more accepting of them, and that often that's the difference between community support and community opposition to new, more affordable housing. And it doesn't really matter always that the cost is involved, because inappropriate scale, materials, or design detract from a community regardless of how it affects the cost of a building. If the structure is ugly or incompatible with the structures that are nearby or around it, or the character of the community, it doesn't really matter what it costs. It still is going to be disapproved within the community. I wanted to bring some pictures of an example. The Alabama Design Studio specifically works in rural areas of Alabama. Each of these, you'll notice that each of these houses are called 20K houses. The design exercise for them was to develop a house that cost $20,000 in materials and construction costs and would still accommodate the folks that they were designed for. Each of these are examples of low-cost, high-design, affordable housing that are very attractive within their communities and have given people of limited means the ability to own and to build equity in their houses. And I would recommend that the committee look more into design strategies to improve affordability. These houses are often smaller footprints than what would normally be thought of, but the reason that they are attractive for folks is that they're well laid out. They integrate the indoor and outdoor space so that they're more usable to them, and it really has made a difference in the lives of the people that have been able to occupy these houses. And if you can imagine that if you have a lot and you're able to put a house on this for $20,000, that very soon you can get out from under the housing note and be building equity in a substantial way. Local governments have the most to gain and lose in making design decisions. On the plus side, good design gives us strong community identity, retains working age population within your community, expands the tax base, and gives you attractive workforce for industrial development. On the minus side, if you have bad design, you will soon see any growth sentiment start to respond to that. The younger generation won't consider your community to be attractive, particularly if you're not reinforcing the character that they associate with their home or with a community that they're considering moving to. There is a vulnerability to job loss as industries become less sticky because there's no association, no sense of place in that community. And then, really all across, I think, Georgia and the country, we see these disposable landscapes where buildings were built without regard to the local community character. They are unloved and unmourned when they start to deteriorate, and yet they continue to litter the landscape. One thing about the built environment is that once it goes up, it's very hard to bring it back down. We need tools from the General Assembly to achieve the public's goals. We need more tools rather than fewer. So I would encourage y'all to support comprehensive planning, try to reinforce the state's adherence and compatibility with local and regional plans, fund the gap in infrastructure and service delivery, and then work in partnership with us in order to achieve those goals for affordability. Each of our comp plans does have a housing element, and it asks how we're achieving housing affordability for our stakeholders throughout our jurisdiction. Those are questions that we need to be able to answer, and we need to answer them in a convincing way and in a way that can build the support of not only our stakeholders, but stakeholders throughout the state, and importantly those that are making the decisions that bring more resources to our community. So as I said before, tax credits, incentives to help us build, a rental assistance program might be helpful to bridge the gap in local communities if there is a shortage that's based strictly on price and not on the number of structures that are available. Rehab of housing for people with low incomes. Often they're in the historic dwellings, that type of a thing, and they need to have the resources to be able to correctly maintain those structures. Subsidized rents for people of very low income, refundable tax credits, other sorts of ways to put more money into people's pockets. And that's important because housing really ends up being the major, if not one of the major, if not the major part of people's monthly budget is to keep a roof over their heads. Other areas have variable costs, but the cost of housing is often fixed and the one that is most challenging for them to achieve. So I'll stop there and let y'all ask questions that you might have. I didn't mention it in the presentation, but I know that there's been some discussion of the overlays as being a mechanism that would still be available. However, I want to remind you that one of the most important features of an overlay, and in fact, in many cases, the defining feature of an overlay is design, not only of the structures themselves, the materials, the fenestration, the architectural style, but also the placement of those buildings on the sites in order to give us the opportunity to generate more density, to make sure that buildings are well related to each other, and I think importantly to give us a built environment that is much more adaptable to changing uses so that people can live and work within the same community, not be able to, not have to travel as much, and can have the diversity of housing that prevents a whole neighborhood from declining because it's all the same type of build program. So I would encourage you very much to recognize that design is a critical element of overlays, that often it is the means by which local governments can make something happen where in, for instance, a redevelopment situation where we're trying to take better use of, better advantage of existing infrastructure and try to, rehabilitate and revitalize a community, those are going to be the toughest times to get a majority consensus, many absentee landlords, that type of a thing. But with a design standard, you can start seeing people being able to make money in building denser buildings within a community. And so I would encourage you, as you look in 302, to look at ways that we can keep the overlay standard so that we have that tool, particularly in the redevelopment process. So, questions if you have any.
Anybody have a comment or question? On the overlay, and in the bill, if you go through the process and get the people in the district, sit down, draw a line on your map here, we want this to be an overlay district. And if you get 50% plus one person to vote, then that exempts that whole overlay from House Bill 302.
Right, and I think that that is great in greenfield development because you have a limited number of property owners, but particularly where we often see overlays most effective is in the redevelopment scenario, where you have, an area of town that has seen disinvestment over time. Often those areas have very, widely diffused ownership. Out-of-town owners, maybe heirs, other people that are not directly involved in your community, and it makes it much harder to reach that threshold in order to be able to then make available a mechanism that available for those who will take it to actually turn the tables on the developability of it and to start installing structures there that normally would be considered incompatible, but because you have agreed to a common set of design standards, therefore we can see a building with commercial utility located next to a building that is residential, or to be able to see buildings that can transition from one use to another. Without attention to those design details, then we have to fall back upon, the sort of traditional zoning where you're trying to separate uses one from another, and it's by being able to offer those different options that you're able to improve the economics of that redevelopment. So I would say that, in a greenfield situation, I think that, I can understand what you're saying, and in many times, the most important design standards are those that are imposed by the developer of a single-family subdivision, for instance. They want each lot to sell to the next lot, and so therefore they're very focused on design compatibility. But what we see is that when redevelopment occurs, even in some of our stable single-family neighborhoods that we have, our community is sort of defined by the 50s, 60s, 70s ranch houses on beautiful landscape lots. Well, we've had a lot of concern from folks who, when a developer comes in and they buy one of these ranch houses and then they build a house that is incompatible in its design, and maybe you bracket a ranch house with two next to it, then actually that house in the middle ultimately just becomes a tear down, because the owner of that house, the value of his house then just becomes the value of the land, because now they've changed the design strategy, because that's what's most remunerative to the guy that bought the lots on the other side. So being able to say that, you know, we want to maintain the integrity of the design that the developer originally established, ends up protecting people, allowing them to invest in their existing house. And so, you know, that's another example of where we have a residential infill overlay ordinance that says that if you build a new house, let's make sure that it's compatible to the ones that are around it, that it doesn't loom over that house, or that you build a bunch of retaining walls to maximize your buildable area, and at the same time change the, you know, the way that the water flows and that sort of thing. So I think it's really important that we recognize that this tool is one that we need to judiciously impose, but not necessarily with, you know, this type of, you know, the compatibility for everybody, because many stakeholders are going to have different perspectives on it. Yes, thanks.
At our last meeting, I think we told us to be able to afford a house, it shouldn't cost more than 30% of your take-home. Is that right? It's 30%.
Right.
Can a first-year teacher, public safety officer, whatever, be able to afford a house in DeKalb County? Are there enough housing
Oh, yeah,
for
we've
somebody
got a wide
in
diversity
that
of
price
housing.
range?
We have a wide diversity of housing in the county. Often one of the biggest challenges, and one that we're confronting now, is to maintain our stock of affordable multifamily housing, because many of those units are affordable because they're older units. And so what we want to do is make sure that the owner of that property can reinvest in it, but that at the same time maintain that affordability. So yes, we generally have a wide range of housing available, and often when we see new investment in neighborhoods, they ask for higher density so that they can maintain those price points. And then the pushback from the community is, well, as long as it is compatible with the rest of the neighborhood, we're good with that. So we'd like you to impose design standards that are reflective of the way that things are here now. So yes, we do have housing affordable at 30% AMI, even in Metro Atlanta.
So there's not a shortage in DeKalb. So
There is not a shortage. There are in some areas, and again, that's where people come in. They want to do higher density, and that's where we use the design standards on a case-by-case basis to ensure that we can get that acceptance.
Tell you what, John, do you want to go ahead and go now? We've got a few minutes left kind of in this time frame. And then if we get to a point, y'all, someone that just came in, if we got time at the end, we'll come back and let somebody spoke. If y'all got questions, we'll do it again at the end also. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Daniel has come down. He's the chairman, or the board of commissioners of Oconee County. And during the discussion in last year's debate, there was a lot of concerns with what their ordinances are pertaining to houses built on slabs. So rather than speculate, we hear it straight from Mr. Chairman himself.
Very good. Unfortunately, we did become the poster child for House Bill 302. That is not something we were looking for, nor do we enjoy. We don't mind y'all talking about us up there, but we like it to be in a positive light. So I want to start by just showing you the ordinance that was passed. The section F kind of deals at the bottom about the slab. So it was Oconee County banned slabs. That's not what we did. There is a restriction on it in major subdivisions.
What's a major subdivision?
Major subdivisions, it's like you're going to come in and if you have to put in road infrastructure or storm water, it's defined in our UDC, the number of lots and that type of thing. So a big development, basically. If it's what's called a minor subdivision, which would be like a 5 or 6 lot split, this ordinance does not, it's exempt from that.
Even if the grade is higher than 5%.
Yes, sir. That is correct. So age-restricted communities are exempt. Continuing care communities are exempt. And then single-family detached homes in minor subdivisions as defined in UDC on undivided acreage fraction in major subdivisions phases, having received final plat prior to January 1st, 2018. So if you're already in the process, this does not apply to you if you're already final platted as a developer. And then lots in existing pre-developed grades, lots with existing pre-developed grades of less than 5%. And that kind of ties back to when you look at Department of Health, and they talk about septic tanks and grades and that type of things. That's really what preempted a lot of this, with some of the issues we are seeing with septic tank failures in our subdivision. I was talking to somebody last week, in a $400,000 house on 35,000 square foot lot. His septic tank failed. He goes in, the secondary fill is now, for whatever reason, during the grading, it got disturbed. He has no secondary fill, secondary drainage fill now. So he's sitting there, what am I gonna do? I got this house, it's probably gonna have to be condemned because I can't deal with the sewage. So he ended up spending about $20,000. He had to go in and put a second tank in there and kind of pump it out. It was kind of a big mess. So that's a lot of it. The other was some of the construction that we were seeing in our subdivisions, or on the major subdivisions, with the production, home builders were coming in, and based on the state code that y'all adopted through DCA, there's limits on how much fill you can do, and then how much, what you have to do if you do that certain level of fill. And some of those standards will not be involved as well. On the second handout there, a lot of talk about affordability and how our goal is basically to price poor people out of Oconee County, and that's not the case. We went out and got a breakdown from our tax assessor, in Athens Park County, and also in Gwinnett County, about home values, and break them down. So homes under $200,000, Gwinnett County, 45% of all their homes were under $200,000. Athens Park, that number is 87%. In Oconee County, that's 59%. So to say we don't have affordable housing in Oconee County is not correct. Now, there's not a lot of turnover. When you look at our Board of Commissioners, there's not a single elected guy out there that lives in a house that's much over $200,000. And a lot of that growth has occurred in the last several years with the inflation or the gain in property value. The other thing I'd like to show you is during some of our discussions and challenges to some of the stuff we were doing, the home builder sent in an open request to our community and asked for home sales. So that next packet you have shows neighborhood house sales comparison, and the page is item number 3, and this is for crawl space. And the average crawl space house is $90 a square foot on the last page. And the second handout, that figure number 4, shows for the slab houses, which are $94 a square foot for a slab house in this county. So if you're talking about affordability, actually a crawl space house is cheaper per square foot in Oconee County than a slab house. So I guess I say that to say there's a lot of different things that affect the price of housing. I was watching some of the film from your first meeting. One of y'all were talking about building a house that was scheduled to sell at $100,000 to $115,000, and you can make money on that. But at the end of the day, it's selling for $130,000, $140,000. Well, that's the market demand. So what's happening with regulation, what's really affecting that, and I think that's what a lot of what we're seeing throughout the state is just the demand for folks coming to this area. So I'll be happy to answer any questions or hear the emotional outburst.
So the main reason is the slab requirement is the septic drain field.
Yes, we're seeing, we have certain subdivisions. We have certain subdivisions that were built in the early 2000s. A lot of stuff doesn't show up to about 10 years down the road. There are basically certain lots in that subdivision that are on a route with their septic tank hauler to get pumped out. And so we're trying to get a hold on. I mean, that's really the state, and y'all try to regulate that through the Department of Health and all that. Some of the stuff gets missed.
So if you take one, and you know the topo of your land, so if you take a subdivision that's coming in, and you go out, your inspectors go out and look, engineering department, and if it's not as rolling as some other subdivisions, matter of fact, some of the areas may be pretty flat, would they be allowed in those flat areas to put a house on a slab and just the ones without
Yes,
the
sir.
contour? And even in a big
It's
subdivision?
a big subdivision. So it's been, the data's there that's showing that less than 5% grade, you don't have those problems don't show up as much. I don't understand all that. We got an engineer on our board, he understands it, and he's done a lot of research on
You
it.
know,
So we're ultimately trying to protect the end user, the actual citizen that's gonna live in the house, that's gonna send their kids to the schools, and sort of this, the home builders in our area, they're not marketing to first-time home buyers. This is second, third home type folks. So they're building big houses on smaller lots. And that's part of the reason for some of the septic tank stuff. Is
Are the other counties having the same issue with the septic tanks around here?
Don't know.
how about, I had a thought there, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, I know what I was saying. What areas of your county have sewer systems and what area is septic tank? Is it half and half or 90-10 or?
No, we're very young in the sewer business, so in the early 2000s, prior to that, there was no residential sewer at all. So the previous board in the early 2000s opened up residential sewer. So there was a lot of, it got gobbled up in about 6 to 8 months. And so right now we did this study, we had like almost 3,000 lots that were already zoned and ready for final plat in Oconee County that had done nothing because of the downturn in the economy. So all that rush to come in and got it. So right now, we've just expanded our sewer plant to 1.5 million gallons a day. And we're fixing to go to 3 million gallons a day. And we're still going to be over committed for residential sewer based on our percentages after we go through. That's how fast that rush was coming to get. So there are some, we're working with our cities to, I mean, the density needs to be in the cities for the services and that type of thing. So we're working with them, trying to figure out if we can allow them to have some sewer in their area and then let them develop for the younger folks that don't want to have cars and that type of thing, they're going to need to be in the city. So we're trying to head folks into that density. If they want density, to head into those areas versus going out to the south end of the county where the land's cheaper and try to drop a 200-house subdivision. You got to run your school buses down there, your fires, and EMS.
But if they have sewer, or they're willing to run the sewer, and if their lot even is over 5% grade, they can put it on slab if they have a sewer system.
If there were sewer available, yes.
Any lot out there, they can put it on slab.
But sewer, as you know, is very expensive. Basically $10 million for a million gallons of treatment to put in a plant. So, and we were at a point where we were not able to hook up businesses to sewer back in 2018 because of that demand was picking up. Some of these subdivisions were coming on, we had businesses that were expanding. So we're trying to reserve all that for commercial growth, creating more jobs.
I got a question for you. Why did this become an issue for the General Assembly to take up and not a local issue?
I think it comes down to some of those home builders that were production builders that were coming in our community were upset with having to change their method of operation.
Based on local control.
Yeah. And so they went to they come to y'all to try to straighten us out, I guess. It's kind of.
Now, remember, if you got any questions, and we get enough time at the end, which I'm pretty sure we will, we can talk a little bit more about that too. I appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
Todd, do you want to wrap up anything? You got anything you want to say? and then we'll jump into GMA.
No, sir, Mr. Chairman, we appreciate you giving us that amount of time. I think it was important to hear from two very different counties on this issue, and I think they explained ACCG's position well. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Oh, thanks, thanks.
All right, good morning, everyone. Charlotte Davis, I represent the Georgia Municipal Association. We represent 538 cities throughout the state and appreciate you, Chairman Smith, and the committee for putting this study committee together and really focusing in on workforce housing. And workforce housing is something that cities, both GMA is very interested in because our cities are. We really think that municipal government and city officials and local leaders are on the front lines of solving not only issues about workforce housing, but workforce development, community development, transportation, and a number of things. And again, that we really do feel that those decisions are best made locally. And simply put, because we have, like I said, 538 cities, and they're extremely different. And that's because they've had the ability to create a unique sense of place that looks different throughout the entirety of the state. We like to say that if you've seen one city, you've seen one city. And that really is because they've spent time and resources with their individual partners at a community level, designing what that place looks like. Several of the presenters that we had at the first study committee meeting are organizations that GMA partners with on a regular basis in this workforce housing arena. DCA brought up the GIG program. Our cities, we have a number that are going through a program right now focused again on workforce housing and affordable housing. But one of the takeaways too, and a reoccurring theme from our presenters last meeting, was the importance of quality of life. And that was actually one of the top factors in recruiting economic development and recruiting new jobs and a new generation of workforce coming into communities. And that's something that through individual design standards, aesthetic standards, and place-making initiatives, cities have the ability to create that quality of life that again looks different throughout the state. One thing I think is important to keep in mind too with the workforce housing, that for it to actually be an asset to the occupant and to the people who are receiving the housing, it's got to fit into the greater context of the community. It's got to be sustainable. It's got to be safe. And that's really what we're focused on. So I want to turn it over to Pete Brzezinski. He's a member of GMA's Legislative Policy Council. He's also the city manager here in Tifton, and they've done a lot of stuff to create a unique sense of place in Tifton, and a lot of efforts gone into their workforce housing. So Pete?
This is the clicker?
I believe so. We'll see.
All right. Well, still good morning, and let me rewind about an hour. And Representative Beverly, the chairman said if you're not here in 15 minutes, I was going to send one of our finest officers to go get you.
Glad I did that.
You can just hang in line.
We're going to get you. So, but on behalf of Mayor Smith and the council members here at Tifton, welcome everyone to Tifton and to the technical school. We're glad you're here. Great venue to have such a meeting. And the mayor wanted to make sure you had a copy of our annual report that just was released. We're all proud of it, and I think I'm going to talk a little bit about the city of Tifton and where we are in retrospect to this particular area. As Charlotte mentioned, I serve with Commissioner Rader on also the Service Delivery Committee, and we've been meeting for months now, and it's amazing just sitting back, because we haven't talked since our last meeting, but some of the common themes that he mentioned are the same things that I'm going to mention. I'm going to need some. Here we go. Okay. So it's really great. Service delivery has opened up a lot of doors with our partners, ACCG, and this is no different. We talked about design standards. I wanted to give you a snapshot of what is actually happening in South Georgia. A lot of the focus sometimes are in certain areas. Sometimes it is Metro Atlanta, sometimes it's elsewhere, but what's going on in South Georgia is really the same and has the same kind of connotations as you're going to find probably through the next couple meetings. But our property values in neighborhoods are stable. We're seeing an increase in infill in certain areas that do not have any housing, but there is need for various stock. Representative, it was a great comment that we're focused and zeroed in. I'm going to show you an idea where we are for affordable housing and workforce housing, because we have the country club, we have the bigger neighborhoods, but it's all the work that we've been doing is around affordability. So I would tell you also from the manager's desk is that requests are being made now for design standards. And they don't know really what they're talking about. It's coming through realtors, it's coming through groups, but they're saying they don't want to make an investment with local rate. And what is happening, the communities in certain pockets, we're seeing a lot of influx of rentals. And that's where we're seeing the low housing product that's not lasting very long. And folks that want to home ownership are getting really frustrated with it. We're also looking at overlays. The historical districts are becoming real popular. But from a development aspect, you can see Tifton has a lot going on. We're not immune from rising costs. Land is not cheap in Tifton, Georgia now. We haven't seen any innovative materials. We haven't seen some of the changes, but we're still seeing the development. So it's very, very interesting. That is, again, where the focus is. But it's also honestly important that I mentioned that we've been designated as a work, live, and play community. We're a play and first community, and then we're a senior gig community. So housing, obviously, is pretty important to us. Also, community development, the comprehensive plan. We have went through this. We've been studying it for 2 years now. We're serious about that. I want to show you a couple excerpts from that. But we're right on top of modern building codes and our ordinances. We've been working on a draft for simple design guidelines that the Mayor and Council are ready to put into first reading. We created an urban redevelopment manager, again, the HP Commission, and then we have informed just last year South Tifton redevelopment assessment. This is a strategy whereby we've taken a certain area of town. Actually, it's called South Tifton, to be exact. Very historical, very rundown, very neglected for years and years and years. And we use this strategy to provide not only a plan for housing, but how we're going to address the affordability and tuck this into a neighborhood that currently exists. Just like any community, the issues, we're seeing the deterioration. We have the disinvestment, property values, as I mentioned. There's disorganization where you have commercial right in the middle, where it was once a factory town and a neighborhood is now a sprawling commercial district. And then the disassociation. Well, I don't want to live across the tracks. That's a common theme in South Georgia. We want to change that perception, and there's only one way to do that, and that's having a proven model for a success. We've done our organizational policy. Again, we're finishing our design guidelines that are practical, that have the proven need to help in the investment. We're promoting these particular areas, and then economic redevelopment is key because we're not after the mega investments. We don't have the 40 acres ready for new subdivisions. We're very tight, but what we have in Tifton, when you talk about a major hospital, when you talk about ABAC, when you talk about the technical school, when you talk about some of the other industries we have, there is a need, and we certainly need economic redevelopment at this particular point. So Commissioner Rader gave some great examples too. As a planner, we're looking at models for workforce housing. I'm trying to create incentives for our policemen, for our firemen, that if we could create this model, the affordability is obviously there, but we're going to put that sense of pride and reestablish neighborhoods without creating another rental district. So that's just an example. The comp plan that I mentioned, you can see, I wanted to just prove to you under our goals, we know that growth is occurring. We're integrating fashion, we're integrating resources, and we're promoting the efficient use of what we have. If you notice policy 4-1-3 on the bottom, encourage continued updating of subdivisions and regulations to ensure that new development is consistent with the character of the existing community. And again, this is where we have followed our plan. This is where we're developing our standards off of. And what's great about it, Tifton and Tift County are very serious about it. And we talk about the strategy, and we have the plan that continues to show that. These are just a couple examples as a development. Again, original character, everyone has the older neighborhoods, a lot of brick, 2,000 square foot homes, very secure, and no HOA. There's no overlay, but very, again, prideful when we talk about subdivisions and neighborhoods. This was built in 2015 in the same area of that particular subdivision. Again, just a lower quality of home. We're focused on the product, and these are the majority rentals. So I wanted to show you a comparison right here in Tifton, what we're seeing as far as new development. We talked about the comp plan and how we're not going to eliminate this, but how do we get smarter with when we talk about products? And here's some more of the new character style of homes that we have that we're building. Again, the median price per square foot is $100, $105 a square foot. The optimal square footage in Tifton, Georgia probably is going to be 1,600 to 1,800 square foot. That's what we need. And again, we're folks that can afford this type of house, $170,000, $190,000. They want the quality because they're really not interested in purchasing something that's not going to last them. Here's where the process falls off the tracks, if you will. And there's been a new dance studio. This picture was taken just this last week. There was a piece of land. You can see to the left we have our senior citizen center, which is all brick. Behind it is our football field. Across the street is a very nice little neighborhood. And we didn't have our standards in place, and a builder came in and put a dance studio that is a metal building with a metal roof and looks very industrial. This is where it meets the road for us in Tifton, Georgia, and we're trying, especially in the city, trying to prevent some of the things that are going to be sticking out like a sore thumb. Again, when you have cases like this, we talk about material, we talk about profit margins. Again, we don't hold any fault to someone trying to make a dollar, but when you're sticking this up in the middle of our city, it certainly becomes an issue, especially for the residents and elected officials. Here's a higher end Fox Hill subdivision, older neighborhood, character of homes, very, very nice neighborhood. This is $230,000, $240,000 range. This house, and again, it's in contrast, and we learn from history, there's one home. And this particular home is, I think, right at 1,600 square foot. It was built in '07, and it does have vinyl siding on it. It doesn't have any of the character of it, and the folks in Fox Hill subdivision still talk about this today. And they're begging the elected officials, please, can you help us preserve our neighborhoods and our property values? So again, I just wanted to share that with you. So, in conclusion, design standards, they do work. I mentioned economic investment is important for job creation. We poll from a 30, 35, 40-mile radius in Tifton to live, to work, and what we want to do is we want to create our own viability here, especially in the housing and small business and the development area. I know there's been talk about protective covenants, but we're talking about residential development that makes it distinctive. What's around it, if it is infill, and how can we enhance the quality of life that we don't see any of the design standards that do not work with the overall character. Again, the benefits, the investments from real estate as a marketing tool, and then lastly, talking about the neighborhoods for years to come. This is where it's going to obviously bring Tifton into the next formula for what's next as we continue to grow outside our boundaries. So with that, I'll be glad to field any questions, but we too real committed to the design standards. We too, as a city in South Georgia, have the realization that this could be a game changer for, what we talked about home rule, but we talked about what's best for our communities, and it's happening right here, and we consider ourselves a real major player in this particular region. People want to come to Tifton, Georgia, and we want to preserve that just as much as we can.
Okay. Anybody got any questions? I got one. On the commercial building, I guess that would kind of pertain to zoning.
Well, actually, it is a commercial area. Zoning was, obviously it was allowed. We are looking at zoning very carefully. But if it is commercial, what we want is standards to say, can you do some type of border? Can you do some kind of accent? Can you blend it in with the neighborhoods? Does the roof have to be metal? Those are the simple practicality things that we want to talk in as far as our ordinances and design standards.
Because 302, HB 302 doesn't deal with commercial retail. Does that, these Fox Hills, do they have an HOA?
They do not.
They don't have an HOA. Have they ever thought of an HOA?
There's one newer neighborhood that we have an HOA in Tifton. They do not have any issues. The covenants are pretty tight, but it's very, in those type of neighborhoods, very, very secure, very long-standing with homeowners. And when there's something that goes wrong where renters come in, it just rises to the top because of that.
Anybody else? Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it. Like I say, if you can stick around a while. What we may do to help people, I know some people are busy and they're working and have to go. If y'all think about it, right before we take a little quick lunch break, maybe we'll take a few questions right then, here in a little while, 45, 50 minutes, and then we'll free you up for this afternoon, whatever. So, okay. Matt, y'all want to go next? Sure. Okay, come on. Let's go. It's 11:10. I got the clock written down over here, everybody, so I'm writing down the time. But we're good. We're going good. So.
So I have extra time, Mr. Chairman, is that what you're saying?
I can't give you any of my time. I'm not going to give you any of my time. I'm going to keep my time. Let y'all introduce yourselves up there too.
Great, yeah. Good morning, everybody. I'm Matt Dobson. I'm here with the Vinyl Siding Institute, and I'm actually going to, John, come down here. That might be better. So I think I'm going to stand over here so I can, so you all can see the slide, and I can.
No, that's good.
And hopefully I'm not blocking anybody's view over here. But I want to thank Representative Smith for hosting this event today. My name is Matt Dobson. I'm here with the Vinyl Siding Institute, and let me see if I can get past some of these technical hurdles here. I may have to stay up here.
Like we tried when she was here, so I can call her back in here if you want me to.
May not have a.
Go ahead and talk a minute, and I'll see if I can't get her run back over here.
Okay. Well, I'll yeah. If she could come back in, that'd be good. Because I would like to stay down here. We're here as the trade association that represents the manufacturers of vinyl siding, and one of the things that I love about working for the industry I work for is we are a siding that is about workforce housing. You know, we're here today thinking about workforce housing. Our siding is probably used on more workforce housing houses than any other cladding anywhere. If you go down to Fort Benning, Georgia, anybody been down to Fort Benning where they did the new military housing? Beautiful vinyl siding, well done in traditional neighborhood concepts with good design concepts. About 15 years ago, I worked with Jimmy Carter on the Jimmy Carter Work Project up in Detroit and in Jackson, Michigan, building blocks and blocks of new housing for workforce housing. So vinyl siding, workforce housing, synonymous, okay? And you'll see why. But I'm not going to talk about vinyl siding today. I know nobody wants to hear that much about vinyl siding as much as I would think everybody should hear about vinyl siding. My background is in building codes, and also I've done a lot of work in zoning codes. I've been down, worked in DeKalb County with this gentleman here. I don't know if I've met you before, but we did a lot of work with you all. Been working with a lot of municipalities in Georgia over the years. So I'm going to talk about building codes, what they do, what zoning codes do. I'm going to talk a little bit about fire safety, wind performance. Those are some of the areas that I think we've had some questions about. And then I'm going to dive back into economic impact, look at cladding costs, look at impact of what costs do to drive people out of the housing markets, those in the workforce, how they cannot potentially buy homes because of over-regulations or duplicate regulations, as you'll see in a second. And then I'm going to introduce John Klingerman here, who is with Certainty Corporation, out of a plant in Social Circle, Georgia, which is just east of Atlanta. I think everybody knows that, mostly, maybe not everybody. And he'll talk a little bit about what his company is doing today. He'll talk a little bit about what his company used to do back in 2007 when they actually manufactured vinyl siding in Social Circle. They do not now, but they'd like to again. So that's what I'm going to cover. So let me dive in, give you a little bit more background on myself. I do have a degree in construction management, so I've built a little bit. I understand, sir, you're a builder as well. So I built a little bit for 5 years. I've been involved with housing markets since 1992. I've worked on codes and standards is really my bread and butter area, so that's where I can speak strongly on things, and I will. The other areas I'll just talk and present, but I won't have as much depth of understanding with those issues. I served on the National Fire Protection Association's NFPA 1, which is the fire code, 101, which is the life safety code. I served on the International Code Council's International Existing Building Code and the International Building Code Fire Safety Committee, which is what the codes that are adopted here in Georgia. And I also have worked on various areas for the industry for the last 15 years on product standards, sustainability, fire safety, and wind performance. So a little bit of background, so you know I'm not just making things up here, all right? I've been around since '92 doing a lot of this. A little bit of on our product history. Product's been around since the 50s. Believe it or not, we took over the aluminum siding market in the 70s and 80s. We've been the most popular cladding in the U.S. for over 20 years. We are the most popular cladding in the U.S. for over 20 years. We're more popular in the Northeast, in the Midwest, because their climate is more severe, and the product's durability is much more appreciated up there because it's necessary up there. So in New England, you go up to New England, you go through these beautiful little New England towns. They have great charm and character. Over 80% of the housing starts in New England today are vinyl clad. You go to the Midwest, again, beautiful Midwest town, lots of industry, lots of workforce housing up there. Again, about 60 to 70% of the housing starts in the Midwest today are vinyl siding. If you get down here in the Southeast, in North Carolina, where I'm from, and where I live now, and you get down into Georgia here, it's in the low 20s. Things are a little different down here as far as architectural style. Brick's been very popular because it's wet in the soil, but if you get out to Savannah and Charleston, Pinehurst, anybody play golf in Pinehurst? The Carolina hotels clad in vinyl. So there's different pockets where vinyl is used more, but it's used less down here because cost of brick is cheaper down here, and brick's more popular down here because of what's in the soils. So, and there are some regional differences that way. Hello. My colleague Alex Fernandez brought this information up, is what is zoning versus what is the building code. Okay, so zoning, and this is out of Black's Law Dictionary. He's an attorney, I'm not, but he wanted me to present this, so I will. So Jeff let him know I presented this. So zoning, is basically, how we regulate the land. The building code is how we regulate materials. It's pretty clear cut. So when you start to bring in design standards that are regulating materials, now all of a sudden you're crossing into the building code area. And we got a lot of questions about fire safety and wind and for our products. And our industry's done a tremendous job of innovating and continuing to improve over the years. We've been here since the 50s and 60s. It's a product that stood the test of time. not as long as brick, but it stood the test of time basically over all of the materials. You remember the masonite recalls back in the 90s with EIFS issues. Vinyl siding hasn't had any of those catastrophic issues. We continue to improve. We are regulated by the building code very clearly, and I'll show you how we are regulated by that type of regulatory tool. We don't need two different regulatory tools out there with contrary requirements, which is what is going on in a lot of cases. And it's adding costs, as you'll see. We're trying to address workforce housing. We need to clear away regulations that are duplicative, I believe. This is what the building code does, which is adopted in Georgia, okay? It's a minimum standard. It includes wall coverings. It includes all sorts of other building materials.
It works.
It does?
You
Okay.
need batteries.
Oh, batteries. Excellent. All right. This will be a little bit better. Let's see how okay, great. So the building code regulates wall coverings, which they call wall coverings, which is siding, brick, et cetera, openings, windows, building envelopes. But you can see, what is it regulating? It's regulating weather protection. So cladding stops the weather from getting into the house. It's the first line of defense. It also regulates fire safety. There are provisions in the code which tell you how to regulate how dense buildings should be built. And if there's certain distance away from each other, they need to have certain requirements in place so that we don't get house-to-house fires. It's very clear, very well done. The I-codes have been in place since 2000. Anybody else in the code business in here? There used to be the Southern Building Code down here, and then they evolved into one consolidated ICC code, and that's helpful. That was a consolidation of regulations. Now we just have one building code that's adopted by all the states in the United States now. It provides limitations on combustible wall coverings. So yeah, in commercial construction, you have to, there's different types of construction. In residential construction, I stayed just up the road here. They're building another hotel here, totally wood-framed building. Most residential structures, low-rise and single-family townhouses, are built out of combustible construction, wood. So that's just how we build. It's affordable. It's a good way to build. We got plenty of trees. These are all the claddings that are regulated through the building code. I'm not going to go through them, but it covers. If you have a new innovative product, you can create a report for your product that shows it complies with the building code. But all the mainstream products are in the building code. This is this building on the right here was designed by DPZ, Andreas Duani. He's a famous planner. He developed Seaside down in Florida. I don't know if it's part of the new urbanistic movement. This is a large commercial structure clad in vinyl up in Maryland, in Kentlands, it's called. I'm sorry, it's Lakelands. Just an example of commercial applications of the product. But as you get into higher density settings or requirements for fire resistance, you can use gypsum board to create an E119 fire rated standard, and you can use vinyl on top of it. Vinyl is not a product that has any unsafe characteristics relative to fire safety. In fact, when vinyl was introduced in the marketplace, it replaced cloth sheathing for electrical wiring. Because cloth sheathing, if we had electrical fires, that cloth sheathing wasn't so good. It would get on fire and then it would get to the wood. With the vinyl products, if there was an electrical issue with a fire, the vinyl it might start on fire, but if the flame goes away, it puts itself out. The biggest combustible material in residential construction is wood, plain and simple. I'm not saying anything bad about wood, but that's the reality of how we built here in most of the United States. The IRC covers 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses. So Chapter 3 and Chapter 7 are relevant to cladding regulation. And here's what is covered in the IRC: structural, fire safety. So higher density settings, you get into higher requirements. Vinyl can be used in these higher density settings. It's been determined through testing, through ASTM standards. The product is fine. So if there are concerns about fire safety, we believe they're unfounded because the product performs. Does it melt? Yeah. Does it contribute to the growth of the fire? No. Now if we look at, and here's what's covered in the IRC. I'm going to cover wind in a second. Let me stay on fire safety. I was at a hearing up in Gwinnett County about 12 or 13 years ago, and they were putting in place an overlay. And conservation, so it's not just overlay districts, it was a conservation overlay district. So it wasn't, so I'm not sure what that meant. It didn't seem to be conserving much of anything because it was driving the costs up terribly. It was definitely not conserving the homeowners and the citizens' pockets for sure. It was driving costs up. I don't know what they were trying to conserve with. We had employees of one of our member companies, Alcoa, that had a plant just east of the Atlanta airport come in, and we had about 30 or 40 of their employees. That plant is no longer there, by the way. That vinyl siding plant that was east of the Atlanta airport is no longer there. Okay, they came into this hearing in Gwinnett County, and a gentleman got up, one of the Alcoa's employees, who happened to be a volunteer fireman, and he said, I understand vinyl siding, I understand what it does, and there were fire concerns from the planning commission that was hearing the overlay district at that point, and he testified, you know, that vinyl siding is perfectly safe, and here's why. And he went through the list, and a motion got the motion, and they ended up passing the conservative overlay district anyway. So when we looked at fact and science and used the building codes as the proper regulatory tool for materials relative to fire safety, relative to wind, relative to protecting the home from weathering, that's good. These model codes are being developed by a lot of great people on a national level with all sorts of representatives. But if you look at fire safety as a whole, this is what the overall cause is from the National Fire Protection Association for fires. It has nothing to do with cladding. So if I were to say to the group here, main cause of fire is drinking and smoking. So the main cause of fire is drinking and smoking. Where do you think the safest state in the union is if it's related to drinking and smoking?
Utah?
Utah, that's right. Mormons don't drink and smoke. It's the safest state in the union for fire safety, if you look at the numbers. So this shows where fires occur: smoking materials, cooking, heating equipment. You get down, you know, cladding is not even on here. If you look at exterior wall surface, it's pretty much zero. So if you have concerns about our product, and we've heard about this through the planning processes, that, oh, well, vinyl siding is not safe, it's not fire safe. It's been around since the 50s. It was first introduced because it is fire safe. And if you look at the national statistics on fire safety for residential construction, there's nothing to indicate wall covering as a whole really plays a role as far as fire issues go. The chemistry of it. It has a chlorine base to it. So chlorine is naturally flame retardant chemical. It has a higher ignition temperature than wood. So again, homes, general residential construction, low-rise are built out of combustible materials. I'll kind of pause there for a second, as I covered a lot of ground about codes and fire safety, and I'm trying to be quick and concise. But any questions about the code?
Make sure you get us a copy of that.
Absolutely. I will make sure this is, and any of the detailed information that needs more information, I'm happy to provide anybody too. Relative to wind performance and coastal specification, what we have, there are products that are rated for regular parts of the country, regular wind conditions like here, and then if you get to coastal areas, there's product that is that has a higher design pressure rating according to what the building codes require, according to what the building codes have as far as mapping goes. So when you get into coastal areas, you have product that is different. So if you get over to Savannah, and up where I live in North Carolina in the Outer Banks, you have product that can be used in the Outer Banks. You have product that is approved in Miami-Dade County, Florida, where we have the highest wind requirements in the country, as you might imagine. So, and we just did recent field analysis on from Hurricane Irma, which I do have a couple copies of this report, but can provide this to the group about how the product did perform. And the product is not perfect like any product. There are installation issues that still occur out there in the marketplace, but as far as the product's manufacturing and design pressure testing, it's doing very well. We're very happy with the results after Hurricane Irma. We've been working with FEMA, as well as the IBHS, which is the insurance industry, to ensure that we continue to improve it's more about education and communication now to the installation than it is about the product design and improvement at this point. So let me switch to economics and to get off the codes again. I'm going to get away from the building code issues. My point on the building codes is that we have worked with Oconee County. Is the gentleman still from here from Oconee County? There you go. Thank you. We worked with you all on your premium vinyl siding provision on one of your conservative overlay districts. I don't know if you're familiar with that one or not. Well, you had some type of overlay. Maybe that was, but there was an overlay district where there's a premium vinyl siding provisions that we had put in place as well. No, it's Oconee County. I remember because one of our installers actually lived in Oconee County. But I'll send it to you. But anyway, there's different ways to regulate the product, but it should be through the building codes. We don't think that if you have concerns about fire safety and product performance, we don't think zoning codes are an appropriate place for that. We think the building codes do a very good job of that. Let's look at the economic impact of what some of these decisions that are happening are made. Here's the average. So siding is done by a square, like roofing. Roofing squares. A square is 10 by 10, 100 square feet. So if you look at the overall cost of vinyl siding, this is kind of like an average vinyl siding, like an 044. I think you guys have I think it's like an 046 in your provision. So it'll be a little bit more than this. That's $393 installed cost for vinyl siding. This is based on RS Means construction estimator. So Representative Beverly, I don't know if you use that with the business that you're in, but that's just a national estimating tool, and then you can regionalize it. Fiber cement, which is very popular, Hardy Plank, everything is Hardy Plank. Great product, been in the marketplace for a number of years. Almost double. Wood siding, which would be a cedar siding, you're at $1,400 a square. Brick is about $2,000 a square. This is a national average. I would say brick down here is significantly cheaper than that. But so it's vinyl, it may be cheaper than that too. If you apply that, so an average size home has about 20 squares of siding. So I'm building a nice average size home, maybe not a 2,000, maybe about a 2,000 square foot home as well. Mr. Vinyl siding installer, you're going to install it for about $8 grand. Fiber cement is going to be about 14 grand, and you want it all brick, you're about 40 grand. It's a lot of money. That's, about $32,000? $32,000 if you require all brick? Wow. Think about that, somebody who's, trying to enter into a starter home. Now, what does that mean? It means that some people are actually getting priced out of housing. So, National Association of Home Builders, their economic policy department does a great job with all sorts of housing statistics. Every $1,000 increase prices out about 127,000 people. Every 1,000. We just looked at 32,000 just for cladding. Millennials are trying to save more and more to get in the housing market. They're slow to get in the housing market for a lot of reasons. Some of the part of the millennial generation is part of it, but some of it is they can't get into housing. I mean, we're talking about workforce housing. Let's talk about getting people into housing, period, the younger folks. You start adding $1,000, every $1,000 layer of regulation, we're pricing a lot of people out. And what this means, what does it mean down here? Well, we're not able to build enough houses today. We are not able to meet the demand. And a lot of it has to do with over-regulation. Duplicative over-regulation. I'd like to introduce John Klingerman now, who is, again, with Certainty, and he'll talk to you a little bit about what their company has experienced. I apologize, this slide is terrible, John. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I have to remember not to use white font in the future. And John can give you a little perspective as a manufacturer.
So as Matt said, my name is John Klingerman. I'm from Certainty Corporation. We have a facility in Social Circle, Georgia. I don't know, some of you might know the Blue Willow Inn. That's probably what Social's famous for. Right now, we produce what we call restoration millwork, which is basically a PVC foam trim application that replaces wood on existing homes. It's complementary to vinyl siding, brick, fiber cement, everything. It is a top-of-the-line product, and we currently employ just over 60 employees right now. When I moved down to Georgia in '94, I worked for CertainTeed in an Iowa facility. I moved down to teach people how to make vinyl siding in Social Circle. Since then, I've become a process technician, so I can cover more of the plant with everybody. At that time, we had over 200 employees. So we went from a little pipe plant that had like 35 people up to just over 200 people. And most of the siding, like Matt said, goes up north. There was hopes that most of it would take on down here, but it was really never the case. It did take on, but not as big as we expected with 12 vinyl siding lines and 200 people. So we ended up closing that down. We actually put a for sale sign in the front plant in the yard. That's how bad it got. Until we started with restoration millwork, and we became more profitable. We're probably one of the most profitable divisions within CertainTeed right now, just because of the restoration millwork. So we're actually starting to bring people back in. I was recently at a job fair last Friday in Covington looking for extrusion operators, bringing people in. So we have property. All right? We're sitting on 60 acres. We have 400,000 square feet in this plant. We just have 3 lines right now. We still have the floor space that had those 12 vinyl siding lines. We did currently bring a line in. It was a new product development. It was a composite siding. We spent $6 million on this line. It was expected to bring 3 of those lines in. We just couldn't make it cheap enough. So when you're talking about the economy, it's like we just couldn't make that $6 million line make a product that the homeowner could afford. So now it's covered up with plastic right now. It's the prettiest line you've seen, twice the length of this room, but we can't run it because we just couldn't get the material, the cost to meet what the average homeowner could purchase. So we still have room to grow. We're looking for room to grow. And you know, vinyl siding is used on more than just the whole house. If you got brick, it's on the upper half. It's the accessories. It's everything. So, you know, you got vinyl siding, now you have, vinyl PVC trim. I mean, that's what's making our livelihood in our little part of the world right there. And CertainTeed, if you research it, they do everything. We're just in the building products group. There are like 3 or 4 other siding plants, and they're mainly up north. To accommodate all those like row houses or whatever up north in Michigan and Maryland and places like that. And we do have a facility still in North Carolina, which is in Claremont. So, just a little bit about it. I mean, we do have room to grow, and we're looking to keep, expanding and bringing people back. We have brought some people back that we did let go. And that's good for them because CertainTeed actually gave them all their seniority that they still had when we brought them back. So, it's a good place to work, but we want to get bigger. There's only one way to do that, is to put those lines back in. So, it's a little bit about what we do.
Anybody got any questions about this?
On the fire rating, I understand what you're saying now. What about, so a lot of, for the 4 buildings, again, a high density as well. So what about the heat from the fire in the unit next to the other one? Do you have any research on damage to the neighboring houses versus the other class?
Well, if you get inside of 5 feet, so if the homes are built 10 feet apart basically, or closer, or 5 feet to your property line, then your windows are limited. So a lot of the fire spread from house to house, as I showed in the statistics, comes from the inside of the house, and if there's a window there, then that radiant heat can get to the next building. So once you get into that higher density settings, they limit the amount of openings, and then they require a gypsum board sheathing as an exterior
To
sheathing.
the outside itself, so
Yes.
it's melting either from a reflection off the neighboring windows or actually a fire, damage to the vinyl versus damage to the different type of clad.
Yeah, I mean, vinyl, like I indicated earlier, vinyl will melt. You know, of course, brick is a non-combustible material. The brick does extremely well under fire conditions, but, there's a trade-off. So there's ways to get fire performance without adding significant amount of cost. You alluded to the reflective sunlight issue, which I don't know if anybody has seen that issue out there, but essentially what the gentleman is bringing up is when the energy code began to require low E coatings on windows, it was doing a great job of reflecting energy back out, doing its job. But what it exacerbated is some of the defects in the sealed glass units that might have been concave, and so that concavity, coupled with the low E glass coating, would create a magnifying glass effect, and it would actually melt or deform the siding, the vinyl siding. Of course, with brick or something, it won't do that because brick doesn't have those characteristics. So we've been working with the window manufacturers, and they're making corrections in their manufacturing process so that happens less. For example, MI Windows added what's called a capillary tube technology, which makes it so that the concavity of the sealed glass units cannot happen. So that issue has hopefully been addressed. We had a lot of that issue in North Carolina too. As soon as the energy code, it's funny, when the codes change, there's consequences that come out of every change. Where another area they're studying is they're making the houses tighter now. You have to use blower door tests in some states. Well, if we keep our houses too tight, we can get moisture buildup. So we have to be careful. One good thing may lead to one bad thing, but hopefully that answers your question a little bit more. Yes, sir.
Talking about the codes, International Building Code, can you talk about who makes up that counselor group that makes up these rules or regs, how are those rules adopted? Can you talk about that?
Yes. The International Code Council is a body of basically code officials. So, in fact, is it Dwayne? Does anybody know Dwayne Garrison? Dwayne Garrison is the Georgia State Fire Marshal. He was the president of the International Code Council, I think, 2 years ago. So the general core of the membership is building officials. The codes, they have code development committees that will hear changes proposed by different people. I think in the last go-around they had about 2,000 code change proposals, and they do that over a 2-year period. So this cycle for the 2021 code is finishing up, and then Georgia, the state of Georgia, will adopt I think they're on the 20, does anybody know, I think you all are on the 2015 code. So you could adopt 2018, but there's a cycle in place by your code commission, which I'm not very familiar with, or not familiar with at all. They will adopt a newer edition, and then the jurisdictions have a time period to implement that code. So that's the process. So we're working on codes that typically will be adopted in Georgia 5 years later, which is it is a very efficient process. And it doesn't have the federal government's hand in it at all, except as offering changes, which I think makes it very efficient. So I just have any other questions?
Any other?
And I just had just 2 more slides.
Okay.
If there's an interest, sustainability is important to our industry. I don't know if this is part of what you all are thinking, but as the vinyl siding product is salt-based, which is where the chlorine comes from to make it fire safe. It's also natural gas-based, so it's very cost-effective, but it's also resource efficient. So vinyl, one of the scrutinies is it's so thin, it's flimsy. That's what we hear, but you know what? If you put it upright, it goes against a hardwood wall, it will last for a very long time, and using minimal materials. And so I always like to say it's like the Prius of sidings. It's very efficient. It's taken, and that is not only just by looking at it, but that's reflective in the cost. There's less materials. John's materials that he's talking about, the cellular PVC, that's not an inexpensive material, mainly because it's just a lot more material. So from the sustainability standpoint, we had the endless summer in North Carolina. I don't know if that was here, but did you guys just go on and on with the 90-degree weather? And we felt like, well, it's important that we are good stewards of the environment. Okay, whatever your beliefs are in global warming, it's just good to be good to the environment. And our products are resource efficient. If you look at the global warming impact for the manufacturing process, use of life cycle analysis, we have less impact on the environment than brick and fiber cement significantly, if you look at the manufacturing processes. And this is not something we made up. This is put out by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. So the impact of vinyl siding is 79% less than fiber cement and 85% less than brick. So if we're thinking as good stewards of the environment, we want to build in good ways, good architecture. We want to think about how we can improve ourselves. Vinyl siding makes an excellent choice from the sustainability standpoint as well. I go back to my main point was there is a line between zoning and building codes, and the folks doing the zoning codes need to do a better job of understanding what's in the building code, and the folks doing the building codes need to do a better job of what's going on in the zoning codes, because there's too much crisscross that's causing an impact on housing costs, which is impacting housing affordability, which impacts workforce housing. So I appreciate the time this morning. There are a few things going on in other states that you may want to be aware of. The legislation that you all are considering, which we're so appreciative of, so that our industry can actually help grow here in the state of Georgia, was first passed in the state of North Carolina about 5 years ago. It's done some great things to help to bolster growth. Just passed in Texas. Texas had over 220 masonry ordinances in place for I don't know, for a couple of decades. Those are now unlawful. Arkansas just passed the same law. So this is a movement that's going on in other states, and we're really excited that Georgia is considering to cut down some of these regulations and improve housing affordability. And again, I thank you very much for the time, sir.
All right, thank you, Matt, appreciate it. All right, what we're gonna do, because we know we all like to take a longer lunch break than what we really need. We're gonna have Miss Kathy come up. I'm gonna let her give her whole background. She's a great lady, I've known her, she's from Columbus, known her for years. She and Chuck, Michelle and I have been friends for years, so I'm happy she's here. She said she's got about a 10 or 12, 15-minute little
Yes,
presentation.
if I'm between you and lunch, I might even shorten it.
Yeah, Kathy may shorten it up. So we're gonna do that. What our plan is about 12 o'clock to take a break. Hey, as in the last meeting, we have some lunches for the presenters and the committee members. I'm sorry about the rest of you, but you're pretty close to an exit right here. I know Love's Truck Stop's right over there. They sell a mean hot dog. And you can grab something close, and then we're gonna try to come back in about 12:30, 12:35.
All right, so my name is Kathy Williams. I appreciate being here. I am a builder in Columbus, as Vance said. I've been in the construction industry my entire life. So 20 years ago, I was actually the director. How do I get this to go to the actual show?
Well,
Up there at the top, there's a slideshow.
Got it.
There you go.
All right.
I would
So
have-
about 20 years ago, I was the executive director of the Home Builders Association in Columbus, and they asked me to co-chair a committee in Columbus to look at housing, and affordable housing, both its availability and affordability. And that consequently led me to beginning a nonprofit organization in NeighborWorks Columbus, where we are both a community development financial institution, meaning we lend for affordable housing, but we also are producers. We are the only affordable housing builders in Columbus except for Habitat, and they haven't done any new construction in years because they're really doing rehab now. So we're the only single-family affordable home builder in Columbus. So I want to talk a little bit about the state of housing in Columbus because last August, the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta did their deep dive, data dive on affordable and available housing in the Southeast. It's kind of alarming. And Columbus was one of those data points. So I wanted to bring to you some of the information. So the average sales price in Columbus, Georgia is $138,000, and over 55% of the population in Columbus cannot afford that house. 55%. In order to afford that house, you have to be around $50,000 a year. Our area median income in Muskogee County, which we're consolidated government, is $47,000. So out of the 73,000 households in Columbus, 40 of those make below area median income, and about 32.5 make above. If you look at cost burden, and one of you gentlemen spoke to the affordable being the 30% rule. If you're paying more than 30% of your income to housing costs, you are considered cost burden. If you are cost burden, you're making very difficult decisions every single day that affect your family and your quality of life. Whether you should go out and get that second job to make sure that you can stay in the home you're at, or what kind of food you buy, what kind of entertainment you have, what kind of a vehicle you drive, how far you live from your home, or really, actually, whether or not you live in a substandard house or not. For those incomes at very low income, there is a gap in the affordable and available housing in Columbus that is leading to people doubling up in homes as well as to our homeless population. In Columbus right now, the gap between what is affordable and what is available in Columbus to families making $47,000 or below is over 16,000 units. That's 16,000 families that are making those decisions every single day. And you can see how it breaks down, and you have a copy of these slides. I did not bring one for everybody, so if you're interested in this information, you also have the data in there, the backup data for the Federal Reserve, if you want to get down in the weeds in it. I'm a data geek, so I tend to do that, but it's good information for different price points and different areas in the Southeast. So that's it on the slides, but what I want to talk to you today, Chairman, is how we can impact this gap, because we as a community in Columbus recognize that it's impacting the quality of life of our residents, that they are either cost burdened or living in substandard housing. So there are a couple of things that NeighborWorks in Columbus is currently working with. We are the community's community housing development organization, and as such, almost everything that we build or acquire and rehab has some form of tax dollars in it, whether it was neighborhood stabilization program or home dollars or CDBG, or there's a plethora of acronyms in which we work in. And when we touch a house, because we are the CHOTA for the city, and because some form of tax dollar is put into it, we have to comply with every regulation ever known to man in every department in the state and in the federal government. And I wanted to kind of crystallize it with just one story. And that is we're doing acquisition and rehab of some mill housing. I know somebody brought up mill housing earlier. It's very efficient housing. And we're using it to house our low-income elderly residents. They're 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. Took me over a year, Vance, over a year to get a notice to proceed from the State Historic Preservation Office. 750 square foot, 2 bedroom, 1 bath units, and the amount of regulatory costs that have gone into that, especially because they're over 50 years old, $100,000 is what it cost me to go in there and do a rehab on. Over a year. It was one of the most frustrating things I've ever encountered in my life, and I've encountered a lot of frustrating things. But that is something that I think the State House of Representatives can really help us with in the field. Single-family builders have been the backbone of the economy and have rescued our economy more times than one since the 40s, when we really started to build a lot of single-family housing. We believe that not everybody wants to raise families in apartments. The LIHTC program is a terrific program, but it is multifamily, and not all families want to raise their kids in apartments, and not all families should. Some families actually want their children to have a yard, and we think that they should. And if you look at the historic context of our neighborhoods, they're single family, and when you start talking about multifamily, let me tell you, talk about acronyms, it brings out the NIMBYs, the not in my backyards, the NIM2s, not in my term of office, the CAVES, Citizens Against Virtually Everything, and the bananas build absolutely nothing, absolutely nowhere. And we have to get over that. One of the ways we can do that is through single-family development. Allowing these families that need workforce housing, attainable housing, to be in homes with yards. And how we can help our builders do that is to help cut some of these regulatory barriers that we have. As a community development financial institution, we're also working with DCA, Department of Community Affairs, on a new effort to find innovative techniques and innovative programs that will help us close the gap across the state. One of those is a program we're just now launching called HEART. It's Home Ownership Earned and Reached Together. Not everybody wants or should own a home. We have a lot of our workforce, especially those early entries into the workforce, those first year, second year teachers, nurses, police officers, EMTs. They don't necessarily want to own a home right then, but they do want a good quality, affordable house that doesn't cost burden them. And in those cases, we want to be able to let them rent a home for no more than 30% of their income. So we've built this HEART program, and DCA has been a terrific partner in looking at innovative approaches. I will say without hesitation, I never thought in my life that I would call Georgia a progressive state that is really creative and looking for innovative ways to advance affordable housing. Well, I can tell you today DCA is, and I appreciate that, and I thank you for your support of them towards this. I think the people up there are absolutely fabulous. But anything that we can do to help our builders cut through some of the regulations that is costing them so much to produce the house, that the statistic, and I think Asa has one too, on the $1,000 cutting out over 100,000 families. It's thousands and thousands of dollars. I was in Washington, D.C. I'll close with this story. I was in Washington, D.C. and on a National Association of Home Builders committee meeting. And I was sitting next to a California builder, and he pulled out his building permit, and he said, "Kathy, you tell me how I can produce affordable housing in Los Angeles. This is the cost of my building permit." It was $55,000. I said, "How big a house is that?" He said, I wanted to build a 1,600 square foot home. And I said, "Well, you can't." And he said, "That's the cost of regulation. It's costing us in Columbus, Georgia, too." You know, right now Columbus is aggressively putting their CDBG funding into aggressive land banking, because anybody in the building industry or around the building industry knows it starts with the cost of land. So anything the state can do to help our cities and our communities really bolster land banking, to get the cost of land out to the single family developers to build, would be great, really helpful too. And I'm gonna end there, because I know we're on a short
No, I think you hit a lot of nails on the head there. I think John was saying, I couldn't hear him, he's probably saying the reason you're having so much trouble, you didn't have a good representative over in that area. Far from it, you got a bitch. But Kathy's great, and her husband Chuck, who used to be with Ledger Inquirer for years and years and years, she was just saying the 58-year-old career change, he's now with Channel 9 over in
Channel 3.
I mean Channel 3,
RBL.
excuse me, I'm sorry, Channel 3, and he's a great guy too.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
B109 today from 12 to 1.
Okay. Any questions? You know, we got people listening from outer space here. So, any questions by anybody for Kathy? I hope you'll be able to hang around.
I will. I wanted to step down here because unfortunately I couldn't see over the podium, so I had to keep looking around.
We kind of have that same problem, you know.
But yeah, I absolutely stick around.
Yeah.
So and I thank you all for listening.
Yeah. All right, that's great. Well, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to come back in. We're going to say at 12:30. If you got a chance to run up to Love's, wherever you want to go. I'm not plugging Love's. I'll make a job there. This is all over, you know. But
Already been there.
all right, so John's already been to Love's. Y'all take a break. The people presenting, step outside. We've got some food out here, and we'll be good to go. And see y'all back in about 35 minutes, something like that. Okay, I think this morning went great. Hope y'all had time to talk during lunchtime. And if you had any additional questions, hope you got those answered. This afternoon, we're going to have a couple more speakers. We're going to start out with Tom Byer. We're going to let him do the introductions. Who all's with him? Just tell it about yourself. I don't want to waste any time. We'll do that. Then we'll have GEMA. We'll have somebody coming in a little while. They're actually in Tifton in a meeting this morning. So they'll be here, and then we'll end up with some home builders, and then
we'll have questions. So Tom, we're going to turn it over to you now.
Yes, sir. All right, thank you, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today. I'm Tom Byer, Director of Government Affairs for the Forestry Association, and just glad to be down here in Tifton today, around lots of trees, as always. I'll start off with a real short plug. I have to, shamelessly, and I won't go through each and every one of those points because that would definitely be boring for y'all, but these are kind of the reasons why we're the #1 forestry state in the nation. You know, there's lots of forest industry in Oregon, lots of forest industry in North Carolina and other states, but there's a lot of reasons that make up why we're the #1 forestry state in the nation, and we're very proud of that, and that's something that we as an association fight hard every day and every session to keep that way. And the only other point I'll make on this slide is that bottom right-hand corner is the 48% growth over renewables. Not only are we the #1 forestry state, we're a sustainable industry too. And our wood supply is actually it's not only stable after all the wood products that our industry creates, it's actually increasing over time. So we take a lot of pride in the fact that we're a sustainable industry as well. These are our core principles. I won't run through those. They're on the board. Private property rights, taxes, and the most probably relevant component for this discussion today about workforce housing is healthy markets. I'll get into a few slides here in a minute, but you'll find that housing and whether it's single family or multifamily is a huge market for our industry here. And before I go any further, I'll preface everything that I have a 5-week-old at home, so if I seem a little less passionate than usual, I am very passionate about affordable workforce housing. That is unquestioned. So bear with me if my eyes look a little droopy. But here's some charts, and it's probably a little hard to read from that distance, but the most important point are the trend lines. You see housing permits, housing starts, construction, and the bottom right-hand corner is lumber prices. And the key point there is that lumber prices are very sensitive to changes in housing starts. You see the one right above lumber prices dips just a little bit, and you can see a pretty significant drop off in lumber prices there. So this is something that the housing market and housing in general, something our industry watches very closely as an indicator for us, and a very relevant conversation for our industry here in the state. There's another chart. Most important thing on this slide is this quote up at the top that I did some research for this presentation building up to this meeting, and I didn't even know this, but 1/3 of all U.S. lumber is used to build new homes and or apartment buildings. So that just goes to show you the magnitude of our contribution here. And it was a slower year, but August we had a 12-year high in housing starts, so that was a lot of good news for our producers here. This is going to be even harder to read from the screen set up for y'all, but I'll break down the most important part. We wanted to dig in, in the cost of a house. What are the components of wood? What are the other components that make up 100% of the housing cost? And we found out, and thanks to Austin Hackney's national group, the home builders do this excellent survey that breaks down the different components of a house, and just wood framing alone is over 17%. And depending on other components, if you have hardwood floors or wood and siding, that can be other components there too, making up various other percentages. And you can even, if you add it up right and you use wood in situations that, in all situations that you can get about 1/3 of your housing costs based on this breakdown with various different wood products. So I'm not going to get into what some of the other presenters got into of, whether these various local ordinances and restrictions are a good thing or a bad thing. I want to take most of the rest of my presentation to talk about what our industry sees as a great opportunity for affordable workforce housing, not only in the state but nationwide. It's a concept called mass timber. It's more or less a new technology being developed that allows wooden construction at new heights and new lengths. We're trying to bring it here back to Georgia. It's already here in Georgia. We're trying to make it in Georgia even more so today. So what is mass timber? You kind of see a picture up there. There's these giant panels. You can, it's been described as plywood on steroids. You take 2x4 boards and cross-hatch them and laminate them together into these gigantic panels, as long as some of these tables put together. And they make up the framing where you see traditional steel framing. This can replace traditional steel framing up to the mid-rise level and even higher in some situations. And I'll get into it a little later, but you know, some presentations right before me talked about the International Building Code and IBC, ICC. Well, our industry was following that really closely as well. And just last year, the 2021 IBC approved these type of mass timber structures using these big panels up to 18 stories. So just for reference, today you get up to, most codes allow 5 or 6 stories. There's some exceptions beyond that, but you don't generally use wood framing beyond 5 or 6. And this technology allows you to go up to greater heights, literally, and that opens the door up for some multi-family workforce housing at a very affordable level. I'm going to get into some specific reasons here why, you know, a lot of people choose this for its aesthetic appeal and, you know, environmental appeal as well, but there's some true cost reasons why people are preferring this building product and why it's coming more and more alive, particularly in the Pacific Northwest and Europe, but it's an emerging technology worldwide. Before I do, there's a couple of different types of mass timber. I won't bore you with every single one, but the concept is the same throughout all these different types. Is you're taking different types of boards in different settings and either nailing them or laminating them or pressing them together to make larger panels that are structurally sound in and of themselves. Here's a little case study that, these aren't just hypothetical, this could be an awesome idea or this would be an awesome idea. These buildings have been built around the world, and just in terms of pure cost and time saved, there's great data on this. This mid-rise building in London, this Murray Grove apartment structure, they found that it took a 4-person crew, 27 days to finish, and all in all, 22 total weeks of construction time were saved. And when you're talking about making money off of a housing unit, if you get finish your project 22 weeks early, you're able to charge rent and make money that much sooner. And without getting too much in the weeds, the reason this is possible is these panels, unlike traditional building materials where, whether it be steel or, traditional stick built where you're just getting a load of lumber, unorganized, big load of steel unorganized to your construction site. A lot of these panels are prefabricated off-site. So once you get to the construction site, it's basically like putting up a big Lego building. Even the sophistication is growing and growing, such that even the electrical holes and the holes in the walls for ventilation and all the things that you need to do in traditional buildings on site, it's all done prefabricated, designed in a computer, drilled, and in this situation, four people total with a crane were able to erect this in 27 days. And there's a little quote at the bottom there that kind of attests to the fact from an architect that you can shave complete months off the time of a building of this magnitude. And like I said, time in construction, time is money. The faster you construct something, the more you're going to make money. The faster you're going to make money off of it. And because it's all prefabricated off-site, the other key point here is construction labor. I'm not a construction labor expert, but the people that are tell me that that's a huge issue right now. Finding good work on the construction site, especially after the recession, is harder and harder. And in situations like these, instead of having to find 20 folks that are working all at once, you need to find 4 people, and it's pretty easy to cross-train them and assemble one of these. So here's another case study I'll show you. This one's not in London, it's here, not here in Georgia, but in Oregon in the United States. First Tech Credit Union. And I wanted to show this example because not only is it a faster construction and more speedy construction, like I showed in the other example, the architects wanted the pricing, complete pricing, look at the big picture to win out. And I'll read you the quote on the bottom from the construction manager. We allowed steel and concrete to compete with mass timber, which is the broad name for this building technology, throughout the evaluation. From time to erect, fireproofing, foundation systems, and other criteria, wood came out on top every time. And you can see highlighted there, they yielded a 4% cost savings over the the course of the entire project, and that's probably, I don't remember the exact amount, but it's probably over $100 million project. So when you're talking 4%, that's some good money. And you know, when you're talking affordable workforce housing, makes the whole unit cheaper, and you can sell units off cheaper that way. And other interesting facts there: 4 months less construction time than traditional. It was a huge structure. I think up until the next slide, this was considered the largest mass timber structure in the United States until one was recently erected in Atlanta, and I'll show you a slide on that here in a second, but a very exciting project over there in Oregon. So it probably hasn't received the press and fanfare in the AJC and other publications so that you would know about it, but we certainly follow the mass timber news. So T3, a building and design company called T3 just recently completed this project in Midtown in Atlantic Station called T3 here. You can see an exterior rendering and an interior shot there. And you can kind of see, you know, I showed you some pictures earlier of what the panels look like just by themselves, but that's kind of how they are. You know, the flooring, the beams, and, you know, everything is just wood panels lashed together. And, you know, I chose this side just as kind of a side bonus because I think in the very beginning, when this was an emerging idea in Europe and the Pacific Northwest, you know, the cost savings weren't, you know, that came about in a little later, but I think most people were drawn to this initially because of the sustainability features and the aesthetic features. And these two charts right here kind of demonstrate that. One is what wood looks like in terms of energy used to create 1 ton of material. I'm glad Jimmy Cotty is not here, or else he would not like that first one there, 24 times concrete. And thermal efficiency, you know, when you're trying to heat your home during the winter or cool it during the summer, there's a natural thermal efficiency in wood that concrete and steel don't have, so you're saving energy costs there and the environment as well. I don't think this video will work. We can give it a try, but this is kind of another innovative, kind of along the same veins as mass timber, but some of our other companies in this space are really experimenting with modular construction. And it kind of goes at the same idea. We need to reimagine the construction site. Instead of bringing all the stuff here to the construction site and figuring out and assembling it, let's see what we can do to get less people at the construction site and faster build times. And I don't think that's going to work.
Did you try double clicking it?
Okay. Maybe not. Well, had I showed you that video, it would have been really cool because you'd see these units like the one in the crane right there coming in one by one, and there's a particular company that we worked with called Katerra using wood products and panels, and they erect all these units off-site like pods, and they just bring them. This particular project was a Marriott hotel, and they just bring them all in, and even for the bathroom, you know, specific parts like that, there's like a package in there, and once it's on site, they just open the package up, and there's the sink, and there's the faucet, and they just put it all together, and it's just done magic for speeding up construction and using less labor, and also involving wood products. So I'll end it on this note. Just a shameless plug too. I started with the shameless plug, so I'll end with the shameless plug. Our foundation has been doing a lot of research on mass timber. We've hosted a symposium in Atlanta to bring architects and builders together a couple of years ago. That was a success, and now we're doing even more research on it. And, you know, we've got the T3 building, like I mentioned, but we're trying to bring more and more of this to Georgia and the Southeast as a whole. We've got this revenue sharing plate. If you're just tired of that peach on the back of your truck or your car and you want a tree instead, because we're the #1 forestry state, we got a plate for you, and it's right there. And there's the URL if you want to follow that, but every plate, $20 of it goes to our foundation, and we can bring more of this awesome building material and innovative ideas here to Georgia. So that's all I have prepared. I'll answer any questions that y'all might have.
Anybody got anything they'd like? Yeah, go ahead, John.
A couple years ago, we how to build dealing with wood, talking
Yes,
about wood
sir.
framing, and there's a big concern we put out there about the fire rating and stuff, and we kind of presented the facts and dispelled all of that. How's the fire rating on the CLT
Yes, yeah, so,
can you speak to that?
yeah, absolutely. Representative Corbett, thank you for the question. That's something first that the International Building Council took into effect, into account when they approved it up to 18 stories. But they've done significant testing. I didn't include a slide on this, but the way the panels are set up, they burn at a very predictable char rate. So, generally, it's not the framing that starts a fire; it's the stuff inside it. So, trying to just catch the wall or the structure on fire would be like trying to hold a lighter up to a big log and trying to start a fire. But once, in the unfortunate case that, there is a cooking fire and it spills over, the walls and the beams of mass timber char at a very even rate, and a lot of the walls that are a certain, amount of inches thick have like a 3-hour rating. So that means the occupants of that building have 3 hours to get out before the structural integrity is so compromised that the building would collapse. And it competes with other forms of building material like steel and concrete.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Building system is adaptable to diverse architectural treatments and that sort of thing, right? It's not just a one look type of a system, right?
No, sir. There's no one size fits all, and a lot of buildings blended in. You'll see some buildings that are completely mass timber, where the entire structural integrity is wooden, and then you'll have other buildings where, say the first 3 or 4 stories are steel, and then the next 3 or 4 stories are all wood framed. And there's a lot of hybrid modeling, and sometimes the exterior might be steel, but the interior beaming is more wooden.
Yeah, you can put different architectural skins or fenestration and that type of thing.
Yeah, in terms of just finishes too, in a lot of these early buildings, it'll be primarily wooden, but the facade on the outside will look like, it'll be some kind of composite or maybe vinyl. Where's our guy on that? So there's you can blend it, you can do whatever, but it just unlocks a lot of possibilities for getting to the mid-rise level with wood.
Well, I know one reason Thomas is sleepy out. His wife just had a little girl 5 weeks ago, and
Congratulations.
last night was his night to rock the baby. So anyway, glad you could be with us. Can you talk a minute about the industry and how the downturn in 8, 9, 10 affected y'all, just in general terms, and how you're coming back from that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. Our industry gets affected in a unique way by recessions. First is, in a way that the first couple of slides spoke to, in that when housing, slows down, that's a big market for us. So there's that. But the bigger issue in my mind is, the supply of wood. When you stop using a tree, it continues to grow when you're not using it. If you the example I always give to break it down is if you're selling staplers and you go into recession and you're not selling staplers anymore, when you come out, you're going to have just as many staplers when you entered the recession as when you left. But with timber, if you choose not to harvest your timber and just let it grow on the stand, it's not going to stay stagnant. It's going to keep on growing. And then by the time you exit the recession, the supply around the state of timber is going to be so oversupplied that the prices for landowners are very depressed, and we're still seeing the effects of that today. Lumber prices with the housing restart up have gotten better, but just raw timber prices are so depressed because we saw a lot less harvesting during the recession, and we just have a huge glut of timber in our state. And the Southeast as a whole, Georgia's actually a little better off than Mississippi and some other states, but it just vastly oversupplied right now.
But healthy.
Yes, sir. No, Georgia is blessed in that we have probably some of the best markets for timber of any state in the nation. That's part of what makes us #1. Other states have just as, almost as many trees. I won't say just as many trees, but they just don't have the markets to sell it. Georgia does, and we're very proud of that.
And as far as disease and pine beetles, we're pretty good shape right now.
Yes, sir. The drought is going to put some stress on trees, but as far as I've heard from the Forestry Commission, a lot of the wildfires have been contained. They've been able to keep them to like 30 acres instead of an explosive 100,
thousands of acre wildfire like we've seen in the past, and to my knowledge, most of the diseases aren't, there's always going to be out there, but no epidemic proportions.
That's good. Anybody else? Okay.
Well, thank y'all.
Tom, we appreciate it. You didn't introduce you. Larry, you didn't introduce the boss over here.
He wanted me to solo fly today.
Go ahead and make an introduction.
Andres is over there. He's our association's president and CEO.
Appreciate y'all.
He was here in case y'all had a really hard question.
Oh, that's good. Good job, Tom.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Terry?
Yes.
Lance Smith. You ready? Okay. We're going to let Terry come up from GEMA. We talked on the phone. I actually just shook his hand for the first time, so I'll get to learn about Terry and hear him like y'all will the first time up. So thanks for being here, Terry, and appreciate everything there, y'all. If you need the screen or whatever you need. If you don't, I'll turn the lights on, but if you need it, I'll leave them on.
You can turn the, I don't need the screen. I didn't do PowerPoint.
Okay. That's good. All right. Thank you, Charlie.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Terry Lund. I'm the Hazard Mitigation Manager for GEMA Homeland Security. I work in the Disaster Recovery Division. And Charlie Dawson, my boss, our new Director of the Disaster Recovery Division, sends his condolences. He's not able to be here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in hazard mitigation and maybe some of the standards that we look at when we're evaluating projects. So my department actually administers 3 post-disaster programs, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program, which is going to be the building resilience in infrastructure when it gets codified next year by FEMA and Congress, and then the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. So as it relates to, I guess, workforce housing, we do some grants post-disaster that specifically can help property owners. Since the 1994 flood event, we've done about 1,500 property acquisition projects. That's giving funds to local governments to acquire flood damaged property after the property is acquired, generally at market value. It can either be pre-event or post-event, whichever is better for that property owner. And then they demolish the house and then they have to promise it's deed restricted to be maintained forever as open space. As part of that process, if a property owner cannot find comparable housing outside of the floodplain, they can get an additional payment up to $31,000. So that's something that the program allows to help property owners stay in the area, certainly out of the hazard-prone area. Other projects that we are doing and have done are elevations. That's physically lifting the structure above the hazard. 3, 4, 5, 8 feet, however high it needs to be. So we've done about 100 elevations since around the 2000 time frame. And then after the Hurricane Irma event, which impacted our coast significantly, we've got quite a few properties on title that are slated for elevation. We can also do residential wind retrofit activities. Those are basically hardening structures to better resist the wind hazard. And FEMA has basically established criteria for ways to retrofit those kinds of structures. It's as simple as putting shutters on windows, strengthening large doors, bracing the gable end of the roof structure, secondary membrane on the roof, or having a continuous load path from the roof the wall, the foundation. So those are some of the main mitigation activities that we do as it deals with residential construction. As it relates to tornadoes, FEMA does have a program where they can fund residential safe rooms. How many of y'all are familiar with safe rooms or heard the term? Those are structures specifically designed to protect the occupants inside the effects of a tornado. So in Georgia, the wind design is either 200 mile an hour or 250 mile an hour wind design. And then you've got the impact standard as well. So basically the wall systems, window systems, door systems have to withstand the impacts of a 2x4 traveling at 100 miles an hour. So residential safe rooms in size are less than 16 people. Anything larger than 16 people, it's called a community safe room. So after a tornado event, we try to encourage communities to pursue community safe rooms in order to protect vulnerable populations from tornadoes. So we've done a few of them over the years. We'd like to see more of those. Let's see. In 2012, I participated in a task force that DCA headed up for the disaster resilient building codes that predominantly looked at promulgating codes for residential and commercial structures for winds, flooding, and tornadoes. So on the flood side of the house, we developed options for different elevation criteria, also different types of materials, flood hazard resistant materials. On the wind side, again, it was different wind options that communities could pick to try to come up with or enforce a much stronger code than what's in the basic building code. And then we also did something with tornadoes, tornado safe rooms, having the design professional recommend areas of best refuge in buildings, and also based on building type, like for schools, hospitals, nursing homes, certain facilities, just adopting a safe room standard for those building types. So those are some of the things that I've had some experience with in working with GEMA over the years. I've been with the agency since 1995. I've seen my fair share of disasters. Before that, I worked at FEMA. My first disaster was Hurricane Hugo back in 1989, and got to work in FEMA's public assistance program there. Our agency administers, all of the FEMA disaster programs. So, the public assistance program gives funds to local governments to put them back to pre-disaster condition, or in some cases to incorporate mitigation actions, hardening of facilities through that program. FEMA has an individual assistance program which helps give financial assistance to disaster survivors, property owners, to help get back on their feet. There are financial limits to that program. It's not designed to put a damaged dwelling back to pre-disaster condition. It's just meant to help a property owner get back on their feet. So it's kind of a very limited form of assistance. I don't think FEMA promulgates really any standards for repairs other than they must follow the local building codes. I think that's all that was on my list of notes that I wanted to share with your committee this afternoon. What kinds of questions can I help with while I'm here?
Anybody got a question?
We got one.
Hey, on the safe room design, you said it was 200 miles an hour, that's the design of the safe room itself?
Yeah, actually, FEMA has maps, wind maps for the country. The 7 counties in the northwest quadrant of the state has a wind design of 250 miles an hour. And then the rest of Georgia is 200.
But that's for the safe room design, right?
That's for
not-
the safe room design.
Okay.
So it's basically near absolute protection. So the standard was developed based on the Cat EF5 tornadoes that they would see in the western, more western states. We're fortunate that we don't really see those storms of that intensity. So the standard seems to be very good for our state as far as the wind design. But it's really the impact standard that kicks in really reinforced concrete walls, protected the windows and doors, either with shutters of a certain strength for material to be able to resist the impact from flying debris, and then the roof wall connection for the lateral loads for addressing the wind loads on the structure itself.
So with the disasters we have in Georgia, and, not just workforce housing, any housing, the process we go to try to bring these people back into that community and get them set up and back at work and back into normal living conditions, that goes through a pretty good process, I guess you'd say. Now those people, when they're displaced like that, do y'all also help with the displacement and getting their home back to the design and then getting them back in there?
FEMA provides, so somebody's house is, let's just say it's flooded. They can't live in it. Hopefully they have insurance, because that's the first line of defense, and we encourage, property owners to carry flood insurance for their structure. But if they're displaced from the home, they can get rental assistance up to a period, I think, of 18 months. And then they can get home repair assistance. So when a disaster happens, a property owner is impacted, they'll either register for assistance by calling an 800 number, or they'll go to a disaster assistance center that we set up with FEMA, and they'll register for assistance at that point. They have to apply for a small business administration loan. So based on income requirements, if they can afford a loan, that's what they're going to get. And then if they can't afford to pay back the loan, then they go to FEMA and then they get a grant through the individual assistance program for home repair. Now, there are caps. I think there's a $31,000, roughly a $30,000 cap in that program area. So certainly, for a large flood event or a large wind event, it's certainly not going to be enough to help that property owner get whole. It's just a stopgap to help them get back on their feet.
So you mentioned that some of the services you offer involve hardening structures to mitigate wind and other damage. This is above, I'm guessing, state minimum standard codes? If it's not, I'm wondering
well, I'll call them prescriptive measures that we have for hardening that I talked about for residential wind retrofit. So that would be shutters, hurricane clips, secondary membrane, making sure you have a continuous load path from the roof to the foundation. So those are just prescriptive measures, nothing to do.
But they're not required in that area to meet minimum standards?
May not have been required in that area, or may just not have been enforced when the structure was built. We also do a project type, and it's mainly more for commercial structures, government-owned facilities called Code Plus. So let's just say the building was designed to 110. They hire an engineering firm to say, we want to upgrade the structure to 140 mile an hour wind design. That's also an eligible kind of mitigation action.
Are there different codes for different areas of the state? Like, are they strict? And I really don't know this for wind-prone, tornado, or I guess you don't have a tornado-prone area, but hurricane-prone, et cetera.
Well, there are wind in the FEMA maps. There are wind design lines, although those lines got much less strict when they updated them a couple of years ago, just because we hadn't had a large history of tropical storms, so they didn't take into account what's happened in the last 3 years. But generally, I'm going to say on the coastal area, in the Safe Room publication that FEMA has, which is publication 361, they do have a design standard for hurricane shelter. So there are some lines on the map. Pretty much right on the coast, it's like 170, 160 mile an hour design. And then it drops off as you get further and further inland.
But if I could follow that up, so do you impose differential standards on things like roof structural requirements or the load bearing and that type of a thing?
We're not a code enforcement.
Right. So, but there are those standards that are available that
Yes.
then are at local discretion to impose into the code. Is that correct?
So if a local
So you have
government,
home rule, so to speak, on that if the locality
well,
wants to incorporate.
it's really up to the local government. They're not actually adopting or enforcing a larger code or standard. They're just hardening the facility to a higher standard based on some design criteria that FEMA has already established for that area of the country. So for instance, if a community was going to do a hurricane safe room, we would look at the wind design area and say, in order to meet the grant requirements that FEMA has, it must be designed to this wind standard.
Well, and I'm more interested in the more mundane aspects of building design, such as the way that the roof is attached to the structure and, the load bearing and that sort of thing. So local governments are allowed to impose more rigorous standards in that regard.
But they can if they choose to. And in fact, the Disaster Resilient Building Code option choices that they have for wind addresses wind design.
But that is a home rule type of thing.
It is, you're right.
Is that voluntary, or that's, I understood that the state building council would need to approve any requirements above the minimum building code?
The appendices, DCA is going to brief on this, but it's a code that's optional for communities to adopt. So they can adopt some of the appendices, all of it, or just pieces of it. So it's optional.
And DCA, Ted couldn't make it this meeting. He's coming to the next meeting from DCA, and he can really get into the code.
He can get into a lot more details of what's actually in each option. I'm just a layperson.
Okay, anybody else? Any other questions? Kerry, we appreciate you stopping by. Fortunately, I think you had a meeting here this morning.
I did. We actually have some DCA got some HUD money for disaster recovery mitigation for the counties that were declared for individual and public assistance in 2017. So that was the 2 tornado disasters and the Hurricane Irma disaster. So they got some money, and they're doing their kickoff meetings for the impacted counties to see what are the mitigation needs out there right now.
Very good.
So ironically, we've talked about some of the structure types, hardening the facilities, community safe rooms. So we hope that some of our residential wind retrofits, because did impact the majority of our coastal counties. So we hope that the communities will take advantage of this. It's like $27 million in HUD money to incorporate additional mitigation actions that haven't been done up to this point, mainly because of funds, unavailability of funds.
That's good. Well, we appreciate it, appreciate your comments. Always good to have good contact at GMA. And tell Charlie we said hi.
I will. It was a pleasure to be able to share our programs with you. And again, if there's any follow-up that you need from us, please feel free to reach out.
Sounds good. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, we got the last one of the day, home builders, and we'll have Austin come up.
That one looks good.
Like we're at the Fox Theater here now.
I'm gonna put your thumb drive right here. It's literally a tree branch if you want to get to see.
Here you go. Hand that to me.
Another shameless plug.
Yeah. That's pretty good.
That is cool.
He gave me a tree branch right here.
I'll get you one of these if you want one.
Yeah, that's not bad right there. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And thanks everybody else for sticking around for the last presentation of the day. My name's Austin Hackney. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Home Builders Association of Georgia. And I may say HBAG or the HBA of Georgia, but I'm talking about the Home Builders Association. Our statewide organization was incorporated in 1955 as an umbrella for our 25 local HBAs, which are located in communities around the state. For example, each of you on the committee may know a member of the Greater Columbus HBA or the HBA of Middle Georgia or the HBA of South Georgia. We're all over the place. So a builder or associate member would join that local HBA and become a member of our Home Builders Association of Georgia and the National Association of Home Builders, which has over 140,000 members across the country. At the HBA of Georgia, we represent 3,500 member businesses, and that's everyone from a single pickup truck builder building 3 or 4 custom homes a year to Pulte Group, which is headquartered in Atlanta and closed over 21,000 houses nationwide in 2017. So our associate members run from pest control companies to mortgage lenders to insurance agents and material suppliers, and that's just a little bit about our organization. This is a screenshot of our website. It's hbag.org if you want to take a look. This is our list of the local HBAs around the state. Obviously, our Greater Atlanta HBA is our largest local group with 1,100 members, but like I said, we're in every local community around the state. So now that I told you a little bit about the organization, I just want to share a couple of data points with you about the economic impact of single-family residential construction on the state of Georgia and also on the local level. So, some of the studies that I'm going to share were produced by economists that are a lot smarter than me, so I'm going to focus on the highlights, and I've got the actual studies that I can share with the committee. But the Terry College of Business at UGA tracks building permits pulled statewide, and they get those from local government reports, and the U.S. Census Bureau also keeps track of that. But
We get it from Terry, and in 2018, over 40,000 new single-family homes were built. So, a lot more multifamily units were produced. It usually is about, it kind of tracks, so for whatever reason. So that's single-family homes is that $40,000 unit number. And but I'm going to stay focused on the single-family market. And just for context, in 2005 there were 94,000 building permits over statewide. So we still haven't come all the way back yet. So the economic impact of 40,000 new homes results in $11.5 billion in income for Georgians. That's money in their pocket. $1.5 billion in taxes and revenue for local governments, and 160,000 jobs created. And so that's a one-year impact, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in just a second. But the local impact of just 100 new homes on a local area, so it's the same 3 data points, but this is just for 100 instead of 40,000. You can see those numbers. And so, that is a direct and indirect impact of the construction activity itself, the impact of the local residents who earn money from that construction activity, and they spend it locally. And the annual recurring impact of those 100 new homes on the local area includes, those new homes being occupied, those occupants paying taxes, and them participating in the local economy. So you can see how, 100 new homes has a bigger impact than just the first year that they were built. And so from those faceless statistics and money for government use, I want to talk about the actual homes that people buy. And those are people like yourself. I imagine everybody here lives in a home of some sort. Your kids may be buying their first homes for their families, or your neighbors, your Sunday school classmates. So, when we talk about that, we've heard it today, and we heard it at the last study committee meeting about that 30% of your take-home pay is where you want to be for not being cost burdened or house burdened. So how much home can you afford? So one thing that I want to talk about from the home builder's perspective is that you can sell, I guess in just a general business principle, you can sell more of a product if there are more consumers that can afford to buy that product. And that relates to the home building industry. And I want to show you this pyramid that illustrates the market for modestly priced homes versus the market for more expensive homes. So if you can see that, hopefully with the lights dimmed like this, you can see it a little better. But so based on conventional assumptions and underwriting standards, it takes an income of about $27,556 to purchase a $100,000 home. So that's bad news for you guys at $17,342. But if you're earning that amount of money annually, you're looking for a home under $100,000. So if you can't find that, you're probably renting. Hopefully you're saving up and getting some training from a technical school like this one. And so that leaves 95 million American households who can afford to buy a home priced at $100,000. And that's above that bottom line all the way up. Those people can afford to buy that $100,000 home. Only 20 million households can afford to pay up to $175,000. So you can see how each step of the pyramid gets smaller and what kind of effect raising the price of a house or just building a more expensive house can have on your market of consumers. So for me, this chart represents kind of two basic facts. And the first is that, our builders in the state of Georgia should focus on providing a home that the biggest chunk of the market can afford. If you can provide a home price at less than $325,000, then 73 million American households can be your customer. And for an example to illustrate that point a little bit, there are over 14,000 McDonald's locations in America. And there are 14 Michelin 3-star restaurants in America. And we've heard those fine dining restaurants may bring in a higher profit margin per diner, but McDonald's is a billion-dollar company and they've served billions and billions. So, the biggest segment of the market is looking for an affordable product. The other point that I think that pyramid chart represents is that the ability of the average American to qualify for a mortgage is fragile. It's a precarious situation. And you heard Matt say a few minutes ago that for every $1,000 increase in the price of a home, 127,560 American households are priced out and unable to meet those mortgage requirements. And that's another study that I'll be able to share with this committee in detail. And so you see some income distributions there that are a part of where they came up with that figure. And then the final study that I want to bring to your attention is this one. On average, government regulations account for 24.3% of the final price of a new single-family home. Regulatory costs for an average single-family home went from $65,000 in 2011 to almost $85,000 in 2016, which is a nearly 30% increase over that span. The average price of a new home sold went from $260,000 to $348,000 over that span. And by comparison, disposable income per capita increased by 14% over that same length of years. So, in other words, the cost of regulation and the price of a new home is rising more than twice as fast as the average American's ability to pay for it. And we heard at the last study committee hearing that lots, lumber, labor, and laws are the reason for rising home prices. So what can we do about it? How can we preserve that attainable housing market so that more Georgians can afford to live in a new home? One way to do that is by putting a stop to unnecessary government regulation. One example of this is something we refer to as locally enacted residential design standards. Design standards have long been a tool for cities and counties to use to shape the look and feel of their downtown commercial districts. And I thought we got some great presentations earlier today about those commercial buildings. Can be an eyesore if they're in the wrong part of town or if they're designed in an incongruous way. We've got some communities nearby like Helen in northeast Georgia or Hilton Head Island in South Carolina that have great commercial design standards. But unfortunately, we've started to see more of those design standards get placed on new residential construction. So that now those same local government entities are designing your houses. Those ordinances place requirements on exterior color, exterior cladding materials, the style of roof structures or porches, the architectural ornamentation on the outside of the house, the location and styling of windows and doors, including garage doors, and even prohibiting some building techniques that have been approved under the state building code. None of those requirements provide a higher level of safety or building integrity and are ineligible to be considered as local amendments to the state's construction codes. And I'm sure at our next meeting we'll hear more about the state's construction codes program and what exactly that means. But basically these requirements get stuck in the zoning codes. And those had recently been used only to divide a jurisdiction into different land uses and provide some regulations around those uses. Now we're starting to see those design houses. And I will say, there was a question earlier about fire safety and vinyl siding, and I think, we were talking about density and the way those fires might melt a house next door or something like that. Those are zoning rules. So if we're not talking about the building code, we heard the difference is the zoning code. Density and setbacks could really prevent any of those questions from even being asked. Our members at the HBA report that these types of onerous zoning conditions can add $10,000, $20,000, even $30,000 to the price of a new home. You You saw some stats earlier about just exterior cladding could increase the price of a new home by $32,000. And so I would just take you back to that $1,000 increase, pricing out 127,000 American households. So if we say $30,000 increase, we're now talking about 3.8 million American households. And a Google search turned up for me that the U.S. Census Bureau says that there are 3.8 million households in the state of Georgia. So that $30,000 increase can really have a big impact because those people could have afforded that house and now they cannot when the price goes up that high. So, what's the reasoning behind these design standards? I would say a small group of residents decided that all new homes have to meet their design tastes. And, I would ask whether we think it's good policy to legislate design choices. Shouldn't Americans be free to choose the look of their new home if it meets the safety and building integrity requirements of the International Residential Code? Why would a government insert themselves into the exterior architecture? And I know that we've heard that they're protecting property values, but I would argue that no builder has a financial incentive to build an ugly house that nobody's going to want to buy. You've heard from economic developers who are attracting businesses to our state and finding homes for workers to live in. I would say if you were moving to Georgia for the first time, maybe from somewhere like New Jersey, and you were excited to see how far your housing dollars could go in our private property rights supporting state, how happy would you be to discover that the local government in the city where your new job is located has decided that new home options must be four-sided brick, and adding that $32,000 to the price of your house so that now you can't get those granite countertops you wanted, or the nice master bathroom that you wanted, or the swimming pool in the backyard. So I would ask this committee to consider, as we talk about our need for attainable workforce housing in our state, what are the negative effects that these local aesthetic restrictions have on the marketplace. And I want to go into a specific example of these in Forsyth County, which is arguably one of the nicest places in the state of Georgia to live. And
I beg to differ. Harris County.
And they've got great schools, and nobody could argue with that. In fact, people will pay a lot of money to live there. You can see these stats: $418,000 average new home sales price. One of those 4 L's is the lot price, $120,000 average finished lot price. But then something I would like y'all to take notice of are the top 5 largest employers of Forsyth County. And imagine what Tyson Foods is paying most of those 1,200 employees, and whether they could afford to buy that $418,000 average home. And here's some of, okay, so they can't afford to live in Forsyth County, well, they could go next door. Well, it's not much better there. So here are some lot price changes over a 6-month period last year to show you why maybe some of those prices have been going up. And here are some really nice houses that are non-compliant to the county's new design standards. And so these were just kind of picked at random. These are existing houses in the county. The design standards apply to new construction in the county, so it's okay that these are non-compliant, but it wouldn't be approved under the new development code. And so I think the point of these photos of these non-compliant, arguably mansions, is just to say that these design standards are arbitrary. They're just a small group of people's decision that that their taste is better than your taste. And so some of these houses, I think you can make an argument that there's there's not really actually anything wrong with their aesthetics, or maybe that we shouldn't even be arguing about the aesthetics of a house. And so one thing to consider is the impact on land value. We're talking about land that's being developed from an agricultural use into a residential use in some of these exurbs. And so with these new design standards, we're seeing a lot of value lost of those landowners who are no longer able to get the full value of their land because of some of these aesthetic design choices that the local government has made on their behalf. So that's my presentation. Workforce housing is, like I said, a key element of the housing market in Georgia. Our association is here to fill that need. And we just ask this committee to consider ways that state government could remove some of this regulatory red tape in order to allow those builders to work.
Question? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Austin, looking at NHP, you guys remember NHP?
Yes.
Okay. So they say the exterior wall finish of the house is 6.5% of the cost of the house.
Okay.
Is that correct?
If you're telling me you do.
And then your data that you mentioned, the price of the house increases by $32,000. Where are you and Matt getting that information from?
That's
you mentioned it.
That's a national average from RS Means.
So it's a national average?
It's an estimating tool used by construction companies. And so it can be regionalized, and as I indicated in my presentation down here,
So just to clarify, so the RS Means data that you guys are quoting is for San Francisco, New York, California. It's the entire country.
There were 15 metro areas.
But it's not specific to the Atlanta market, is that correct?
Right, the Atlanta market, maybe it has to look at the 15.
Just give us your number that you have.
So just wanted to clarify that point, that that's not specific to the Atlanta market.
What is it?
And can I follow up to you, is that specific to any kind of square footage?
Yeah, the average square house has about 20 squares of siding on the outside or brick or whatever.
So is it fair to say that RS Means can be broken out by the square footage?
It is, that was the square footage number.
And it does vary.
What varies?
Square footage, sizes of houses.
Yeah, these are just average.
I think we can all agree that, yeah, the square footage and the size of the houses varies, yes.
Okay.
So if you got a number you want to give us?
I could certainly share with the committee the numbers for RS Means for various square footage for Atlanta market.
Do you have them with you?
I can pull them up.
Yeah, just whatever. If you want to give a number, that's good. If that's a national average, if you've got the Georgia average, you're more than welcome to.
Mr. Chairman, when I forward you my presentation, I'll break out I think it's just the Atlanta market, because it does it by metro region. I'd be happy to do that. I should have done that before. I apologize.
Oh, that's good. That's good. We're just here to gather information, so.
I'll submit that.
All right, anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
When you're talking about regulatory burden, are you talking about things like stormwater management and street development standards and other elements of the development standards that are necessary? So those all include these things that are essential to the integrity of the site development and that sort of thing too, right?
Right, so that percentage of the new home price that's due to regulatory costs includes the pre-development costs
So
and the during construction.
So you're
costs.
suggesting that we should relieve folks of stormwater management and some of these other?
My suggestion is just to consider that a full quarter of the price of the house is due to government regulation, and that any additions to those regulations is going to drive that number up. Any reduction of those regulations is going to pull that number back down.
But how do you differentiate between how do you differentiate between what is, a legitimate pursuit of the public interest and what is, you know, an administrative burden.
That's a great question. I mean, I think that all of these new codes and regulations deserve some type of cost-benefit analysis to make sure that the cost that a consumer incurs is to their own benefit, and it's not just an arbitrary decision that's been made by a bureaucrat in an office somewhere.
Well, if I may, I think that's a fair response. There are costs with regulations, but just to be sure that includes state minimum standard codes. That's a government regulation.
It does, and you saw that, you know, the number from 2011 went up to a new number in 2016, and those changes cost more dollars. I mean, we're talking about, you know, if it's just training on the new realities of the code, or if it's a new code change that requires a more expensive technique or product, all of that stuff got put into that study, which I'd be happy to share with you.
Some of the most expensive code amendments have to do often with, you know, the energy code, which obviously deliver an ongoing operating cost savings to the property owner. Do y'all reflect the payback of these either to the tax base or to the owner of the property or others benefit recipients? I mean, they're not all transfers of costs from, you know, a home builder's pocket to the government.
That's right. I would have to check in with the economists that published the study to find out those exact questions, but you're right. It's all part of that cost-benefit analysis to find out what you're getting for your house.
And then what, you know, would y'all consider to be, you know, sort of the unregulated land minimum necessary in order to support this type of development? Is it, you know, 80% lot coverage? Is it 100% lot coverage? Or calling anything excess of the footprint of the house to be a regulatory word?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Well, in other words, we have minimum lot sizes, right? So the minimum lot size typically exceeds the footprint of the house. And, you know, depending upon the zoning category, you have, you know, a higher or lower lot coverage. What of that is considered to be regulatory burden as opposed to, you know, an element of the inherent value of the property?
You know, I'd have to check in with those economists that developed the study to really be able to answer that. I will say that, and I think to your point earlier, higher, denser developments are more efficient.
Right. But they also require additional regulatory, you know, burdens to mitigate the impact of, I mean, land basically is a means of being able to mitigate, you know, external impact. The more land that you have around something, the less you have to worry about what it affects around it. So the smaller the lot, the more potential for externality. And so that's an interesting, you know, these issues, I guess, depend fundamentally on the assumptions. And I think that when we think of regulatory burden, we think of, you know, superfluous or unnecessary expense.
I guess one thing I'd throw out is we've all started out today talking about HB 302. You know, if we're looking at regulatory burdens or decisions made by us, government, or whatever government, tell a person, how does it come into play that you tell somebody how their floor plan is shaped? How does that help?
Well, in some ways, as I pointed out, design in something like a floor plan can actually allow you to, you know, provide the same level of, you know, functionality with a smaller footprint and a smaller price. You know, this is something that has really been embraced in this tiny house movement, where people are thinking more creatively about how they design the insides of houses to make them so that you don't need to substitute just pure square footage for functionality. So I think that those features, if you have certain elements of the design that are incorporated into the design, then, you know, you're able to trade off some other costly factors and get the same level of functionality.
Who else?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, Clemson grad, so you apologize, it takes me a while for numbers. But was able to get the Atlanta market RS Means information. Were you pulling 217, Matt and Austin? Or were y'all pulling 217
The year?
for RS Means?
Yeah, I think it was, actually, I pulled it up, I can tell you in a second.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and just reference the 217 data for Atlanta. And this is the total home construction cost. Were you talking about total home construction cost?
No, we're just talking about.
Or were you talking about total
cladding,
cost of
material,
exterior
labor.
wall cladding? You were talking about total cost of exterior wall
If
cladding?
you let me respond, you can
Okay,
ask me a question.
sure, I apologize, go ahead.
That's the total cost of cladding, material, and labor,
Okay.
and overhead and profit.
So looking at total home construction costs in the Atlanta market, and I apologize I want to be respectful of everybody's time here. $249,028 is the cost of a stone house. $228,654 is the cost of a clay brick house. Stucco is $227,294, and this is square footage of 2,700 feet. Wood siding is $242,748. Fiber cement is $223,440, and then vinyl is $213,763. So, in the variance between a vinyl house and a brick house, as far as total home construction cost, it's $14,000 versus the $32,000 that was quoted. Or 30, was it 32 or 33?
This is national, you're going at Atlanta region,
Okay,
is that right?
that's correct, sir.
So there are always going to be different numbers. If
And-
you're looking at national, just looking at region.
Did you say 213 to 2, what was your number?
228.
And those are
That's
numbers
the total
based on the overall
construction
square
cost.
footage of the house itself.
2,700 square foot house.
Right, that's a
Total
square foot
home
number for the
construction.
house. What the information we provided was the square, which is how siding is measured, a square of the house material.
I think all of us understand square footage and the variances that can occur with square footage.
Well, you're talking about square footage of the house, I'm talking about square footage of the siding on the side of the
Yeah,
house.
through the house.
So it is a little different, and I think that it is different. And I did check our Atlanta numbers, which I will share with you. They're about 20% lower, relatively speaking. So the brick number is 20% lower, but the vinyl siding number is about 20% lower. And I'll share that with you, sir.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, just put that, when you send that to us, just put that. Let's get to Charlotte, I don't want to run out of time. Charlotte?
Thank you, Chairman. I hate to make a comment on number one, and also a number I don't have right now. But to Austin's point, I think about the median home value that was cited in Forsyth County in the workforce, the top 5 employers there, and I agree with you, Austin, that's a very high home price. But I think it's important to keep in mind that that's the price of a new home. And so I would be curious to see, and I know we can get it from somewhere, but maybe the median value of, say, home on the market, that's not necessarily a new home, but that might be a better workforce fit than, and maybe too the percentage of people who are buying brand new homes off the market that are also considered workforce.
Anybody else?
I got a non-number related question. And there's a lot of the talk is, I think it kind of sounds development centric. In a lot of the discussions we've had, do you think that the regulatory burden applies to the family that's been gifted a half acre somewhere by their people and they want to do one custom build that fits the lot size requirements and everything else? Do you think those regulations, do you think that cost applies to them just as well as to the big development stuff like we've heard elsewhere?
Well, I'll say every jurisdiction treats these things differently, which is its own deal for our members who build in multiple jurisdictions to have to figure out the different regulatory environment for each. So I would say it definitely depends on where that half-acre lot is located. But you know, any of these regulations that only deal with the aesthetic exterior of the house, you know, none of them require a less expensive building technique or material to be used. And so, you know, what I would end on is to say that they all add cost to a house, no matter what price point it's at, or whether that market can absorb the extra cost or not. There's no way that a design standard that requires a more expensive product does not add cost to the house.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Awesome. All right, so we're gonna keep our record going. I think we finished about 5 minutes earlier last time. Y'all, we appreciate everybody coming. If you didn't get a chance to sign up on the sign up for the sheet, this is just something I keep in my office. I figure out who's here. Sign that up, and we're gonna be meeting. We'll put out a public notice on our meeting in November and let you know when that is. We'll have an agenda. We're still working on that to figure out who will come and speak. But I appreciate everybody's participation. If you think of a question riding home, and you got plenty of time to think of several, just jot them down. Wait a minute, don't jot them down, you'll be driving. Do something hands-free, and
Don't tell John Carson.
that's right. Yeah, don't tell John Carson you wrote a note down. And we look forward to seeing y'all in November, and thank you very much for attending.